The First Family. A day in the life of Lucy and the ape-humans who walked between two worlds. The Awakening, 3.2 million years before present. Dawn breaks over the Afar Triangle in what will one day be called Ethiopia. But there is no Ethiopia. There are no countries, no borders, no names. There is only the world as it has always been, raw, unforgiving, and utterly indifferent to the small creature stirring in the acacia tree. She opens her eyes. We'll call her Lucy, though she has no name for herself. She has no concept of names at all. But 3.2 million years from now, paleontologists will give her this name, will make her famous, will build her into an icon of human evolution. Right now, in this moment, she is simply a small female Australopithecus afarensis, approximately 25 years old, barely 3 feet 7 inches tall, weighing perhaps 60 pounds. And she is hungry. The pre-dawn darkness is not yet complete. That transitional blue light, what photographers will one day call the blue hour, filters through the acacia canopy above her sleeping platform. Lucy's eyes, larger than yours or mine in proportion to her skull, capture every available photon. Her vision is sharp, adapted for a life that still requires her to navigate between branches, though not as exclusively as her ancestors did just a few million years earlier. She doesn't leap from her nest immediately. This hesitation isn't fear exactly, it's calculation. Below her, in the darkness beneath the tree, invisible things move. She can hear them, the soft padding of paws, the rustle of grass, the distant cough of a predator that might be a hyena or might be something worse. Her species, Australopithecus afarensis, occupies a precarious position in the food web. They are not apex predators. They are not even particularly formidable prey. They are simply available. And yet, they survive. Lucy shifts her weight on the crude platform of broken branches she's arranged in the fork of the tree. The movement is oddly human, oddly deliberate. Her arms, though longer than modern human proportions would allow, move with purpose. Her hands, and this is crucial, her hands possess a precision grip that her more ape-like ancestors lacked. She can touch her thumb to each fingertip in sequence, a seemingly minor anatomical detail that represents a revolution in evolutionary potential. But she doesn't think about evolution. She thinks about food. The platform beneath her is approximately 15 feet above the ground, high enough to discourage most nocturnal predators, low enough for her to reach before exhaustion or pursuers overtake her. This is the mathematics of survival, calculated not by conscious thought, but by 3 million years of natural selection. Those of her ancestors who built platforms too low were eaten. Those who built them too high broke their necks falling from them in the dark. She is the descendant of those who got the height exactly right. As the blue darkness begins to shift toward gray, Lucy hears the first call. It comes from another tree, perhaps 40 meters away, a low, hooting vocalization that carries across the woodland savanna. Another female, another member of what we might cautiously call her group, or troop, though these aren't quite the right words. Lucy's social structure is something we can only glimpse at from fragmentary evidence. Worn teeth suggesting food sharing, healed fractures suggesting care for the injured, and the simple fact that multiple individuals are found fossilized together, suggesting they died together. Lucy responds with her own call, a sound that originates deep in her chest and emerges as a complex series of grunts and hoots. If you heard this sound, you would recognize it as not quite human and not quite chimpanzee. It would unsettle you in a way you couldn't quite articulate. It would sound like language, but wouldn't be language. It would carry meaning, I am here, I am alive, I made it through the night. But not grammar, not syntax, not the infinite generative potential of human speech. Not yet. The sky continues its transformation from black to blue to gray to gold. Lucy watches, though she has no aesthetic appreciation for sunrise. She watches because the changing light is the signal, the permission slip written by physics and biology that tells her it's time to descend. But before we follow her down from that tree, we need to understand exactly where and when we are. The year is 3.2 million BC, give or take a few thousand years. The location is the Afar Triangle in northeast Africa, a geological hotspot where three tectonic plates are slowly tearing the continent apart. Millions of years from now, this rift will widen enough to allow the Indian Ocean to flood inland, creating a new sea. But in Lucy's time, the Afar is a mosaic environment, a patchwork of grasslands, woodlands, rivers, and volcanic outcroppings that creates one of the most diverse and dangerous habitats on Earth. This environmental diversity is crucial. It's not an accident that hominins, the evolutionary lineage that will eventually lead to modern humans, emerged in Africa during a time of dramatic climate fluctuation. The old story, the one you might have learned in school, suggested that early humans evolved on the open savanna, forced to walk upright to see over tall grass, forced to become smart to survive without the protection of trees. But that story is too simple. The truth, as we now understand it from decades of paleontological research, is far stranger and more interesting. Lucy's species didn't evolve exclusively in the trees or exclusively on the ground. They evolved in between, in a transitional environment where success required the ability to navigate both worlds. This is what makes Australopithecus afarensis so fascinating and so important. They are neither ape nor human. They are something else entirely. A chimera, a hybrid, a living answer to a question evolution was asking about what forms a bipedal ape might take. Look at Lucy's skeleton, or rather at the 40% of it that paleontologist Donald Johansson's team discovered in 1974, a finding that would revolutionize our understanding of human origins. Her pelvis is short and broad, adapted for bipedal walking. Her leg bones angle inward toward the knee, creating the carrying angle that allows modern humans to walk efficiently with one foot directly in front of the other. Her big toe is aligned with the other toes, not opposable like a chimpanzee's, suggesting she couldn't effectively grasp with her feet. All of this evidence screams ground dweller, walker, bipedal ape. But then look at her arms, proportionally longer than a modern human's. Look at her curved finger bones, perfect for grasping branches. Look at her shoulder joints, which retain mobility for overhead reaching and hanging. Look at the structure of her inner ear, which gives her the balance necessary for climbing. All of this evidence whispers, tree climber, arboreal refuge seeker, cautious inhabitant of the canopy. She is a contradiction. She is a transition. She is evolution caught in the act of experimenting, of trying out new designs, of testing what happens when you take an ape's body plan and modify it for walking upright while retaining enough tree climbing ability to escape the predators who would eagerly devour any ape foolish enough to sleep on the ground. This is why we're watching her today, why we're about to follow her through one day in her life. Because Lucy represents a pivotal moment in the story of how we became human. She is not our direct ancestor. The evolutionary tree is bushier than that, with many branches leading to dead ends. But she is our cousin, close enough in time and anatomy to show us what the transition from ape to human actually looked like. And that transition, as we're about to see, was neither smooth nor inevitable. The sun breaks the horizon. Lucy descends. Her movement down the tree trunk is fluid but cautious, a controlled fall using all four limbs, her fingers and toes finding purchase on bark, her body close to the trunk. She doesn't climb down the way a human would, facing the tree and stepping carefully. She descends more like a bear, facing outward, using her grip strength and curved fingers to control her descent. Within seconds, she's on the ground, and immediately everything changes. In the trees, Lucy is confident, graceful, at home. On the ground, she is something else. Alert, vigilant, constantly scanning. Her posture shifts. She straightens up, standing more erect than any chimpanzee, but not quite as upright as a modern human. Her knees are slightly bent, her body leaning slightly forward from the hips. If you saw her silhouette, you would recognize it as hominid, but you would also recognize it as wrong somehow. Not quite us, not quite them, something in between. She takes her first steps of the day, and this is where we need to pay close attention. Watch how she walks. Her gait is not a chimpanzee's awkward waddle, where each step requires the whole body to heave from side to side. Nor is it the efficient striding gait of a modern human, where the body remains centered over the legs and each step costs minimal energy. It's something in between. Functional bipedalism with room for improvement. Her footprints, and we have these, miraculously preserved in volcanic ash at Laetoli in Tanzania, dating to 3.6 million years ago, show a modern human foot structure. The impressions clearly display a heel strike, a weight transfer through the foot, and a toe off, the same pattern you create when you walk across a beach. But the gait that created these prints was shorter strided, more cautious, more energetically expensive than modern human walking. Why did she walk upright at all? This question has consumed anthropologists for decades, spawning dozens of theories, some brilliant, some absurd. The old savanna hypothesis suggested that standing upright allowed early hominins to see predators over tall grass. The thermoregulation hypothesis proposed that standing upright reduced the body surface area exposed to the harsh midday sun, allowing for better heat management. The provisioning hypothesis suggested that upright posture freed the hands to carry food back to offspring or mates. The truth, as recent research suggests, is probably all of these and none of these. Lucy walks upright because her ancestors, perhaps species like Australopithecus ramidus, who lived 1 million years before her, began experimenting with bipedalism for reasons we can only guess at. Maybe it started with standing upright to reach fruit on low branches. Maybe it began with wading through shallow water, a behavior that would reward any ape who could keep its head above water while its hands were full of food. Maybe it was sexual selection, females choosing mates who could stand tall and display their strength. What matters is that by Lucy's time, bipedalism is established. It's not optional. It's not a trick she can do sometimes. It's her default mode of locomotion on the ground. She is committed to this experiment, for better or worse. And right now, standing in the gray dawn, Lucy demonstrates why this commitment has benefits. She walks toward a cluster of fig trees about 200 meters away, a journey that would take you or me perhaps 2 or 3 minutes of casual strolling. For Lucy, this walk is a calculated risk. She moves in short bursts, walking 10 or 15 meters, then pausing, standing fully upright to scan the horizon. Her head swivels, her large eyes searching for movement. Her ears, slightly larger than modern human ears, catch every sound. The rustling of grass that might be wind or might be a stalking felid. The distant barking of baboons that might indicate a predator's presence. The buzzing of insects that tells her nothing dangerous is immediately nearby. This is the predation pressure that shaped her ancestors and will shape her descendants. East Africa, 3.2 million years ago, is a killing field, a crucible where natural selection operates with brutal efficiency. Saber-toothed cats, massive hyenas, extinct species of lions and leopards, all of them patrol these woodlands and grasslands. All of them see a small, slow-moving ape as an easy meal. And yet, Lucy walks upright through this danger, because walking upright gives her something crucial: visual range. Standing on 2 legs, she can see farther than any quadrupedal primate. She can spot threats before they spot her. She can identify food sources, fruit trees, animal carcasses, water sources, from greater distances. This enhanced visual surveillance isn't as good as being a true cursorial predator, isn't as effective as being a gazelle that can outrun danger, but it's something. It's an edge. It's enough. She reaches the fig trees without incident. Now, watch what happens next, because this is where Lucy's day and our story truly begins. She's not alone at the fig trees. 3 other members of her group are already here. An older female, perhaps 40 years old, ancient by Australopithecine standards, where few individuals survive past 30, and 2 juveniles, not quite adults, not quite children. They acknowledge Lucy's arrival with soft vocalizations, grunts that carry recognition and reassurance. You are known, you are tolerated, you may feed here. This is not a human greeting, but it's not purely chimpanzee either. It's something in between, something we can only approximate from primate studies and comparative anatomy. Lucy's larynx is positioned higher in her throat than a modern human's, limiting the range of sounds she can produce. She has no sophisticated language, no grammar, no ability to discuss abstract concepts or plan for distant futures. But she has social intelligence, the ability to recognize individuals, remember relationships, track alliances and conflicts. She has, in other words, the cognitive foundation upon which language will eventually be built, but the building itself has not yet begun. The figs are ripe, and Lucy eats. She reaches up, those long arms useful here, and plucks fruit after fruit, stuffing them into her mouth with both hands. She eats quickly, without table manners, without any sense that eating should be a leisure activity. She eats the way an animal eats when it doesn't know where its next meal will come from. But here's something interesting. Watch her teeth as she chews. Lucy's teeth are fascinating, a mosaic of primitive and derived features that tell us volumes about her diet and lifestyle. Her canines are small, much smaller than a chimpanzee's, without the dramatic sexual dimorphism that gives male apes dagger-like fangs. Her molars are large, with thick enamel, perfect for grinding tough plant materials. But her jaw is somewhat prognathic, protruding forward, giving her face a less human, more ape-like profile. Analysis of microscopic wear patterns on Australopithecine teeth, combined with isotopic analysis of tooth enamel, reveals something surprising. Lucy and her kin were dietary generalists. They ate fruits when available, roots and tubers when necessary, possibly some meat opportunistically scavenged or hunted. They were not specialist feeders like pandas or koalas. They were flexible, adaptable, able to survive on whatever food the environment provided. This dietary flexibility is crucial. It's one of the key innovations that will allow the hominin lineage to survive, to spread, to eventually dominate the planet. Specialists evolve themselves into corners, becoming so adapted to one food source that environmental changes can wipe them out. Generalists survive by being good enough at many things rather than excellent at one thing. Lucy finishes feeding as the sun climbs higher. The temperature is rising quickly now, the African heat beginning its daily assault. She needs water. This is where our story takes its first dramatic turn, where we move from simple behavioral observation to something more profound, the question of consciousness, of inner experience, of what it might feel like to be Lucy. Does she know she's thirsty? Does she experience the sensation of thirst the way you do? As a conscious perception, a feeling that can be reflected upon and discussed? Or is her thirst merely a physiological signal that drives behavior without any intervening consciousness? We don't know. We can never know. The hard problem of consciousness, the question of subjective experience, is hard enough with living humans who can tell us what they're experiencing. With an extinct ape-human from 3.2 million years ago, it becomes impossible. But we can guess, based on what we know about primate cognition, that Lucy has some form of inner experience, some quale of what it's like to be her. She's not a philosophical zombie, not a mere automaton responding to stimuli. She has preferences, emotions, fears, desires. She recognizes individuals and responds to them differently. She remembers where water sources are located and can navigate to them across complex terrain. She has, in other words, a mind. Not a human mind, but not a merely animal mind either. Something in between. Lucy leaves the fig trees and begins walking toward the river, about half a kilometer away. Other members of her group, perhaps 8 or 10 individuals total, though the exact size of Australopithecine groups is debated, begin following. This is not leadership in any formal sense. Lucy isn't the alpha female. She's not making a decision on behalf of the group. She's simply thirsty, and others who are also thirsty follow her because they know where she's going. This is distributed cognition, social learning, culture in its most primitive form. The walk to the river takes 20 minutes, an eternity in predator time. Lucy and her companions move through tall grass, through scattered acacia trees, through terrain that offers concealment to predators and little protection for small bipedal apes. They move as a group, maintaining visual contact, sharing vigilance responsibilities. When one individual spots something concerning, a distant movement, an unfamiliar sound, they vocalize, and the entire group freezes, every head turning toward the potential threat. This is where we need to pause our narrative and ask, what are the chances that Lucy, specifically, will survive this day? The answer is sobering. Based on mortality data estimated from fossilized Australopithecine populations, Lucy faces roughly a 0.01% chance of dying today, a 1 in 10,000 risk. That might not sound like much, but compound that risk over 365 days, and her annual mortality rate is roughly 3.5%. If she lives to age 30, she'll have faced death thousands of times, and she'll have been extraordinarily lucky to survive. Most of her peers don't. Most individuals born into her species die young, killed by predators, killed by disease, killed by accidents, killed by violence from their own kind. The ones who survive to reproductive age are the strong, the lucky, the slightly smarter, the slightly faster, the slightly more careful. She is a survivor. For now. The group reaches the river, really just a stream, perhaps 20 feet wide, flowing between muddy banks. Lucy approaches cautiously. Waterholes and rivers are natural ambush points. Every predator knows that prey must drink, that thirst will overcome fear, that patience near water is rewarded with food. Lucy kneels at the water's edge, another distinctly hominin behavior, using her bipedal anatomy to crouch rather than bend at the waist like a quadruped, and drinks, scooping water with her hands, a gesture that looks almost human except for those curved fingers, those proportionally long arms. The water is muddy, filled with parasites that will kill many of her peers through accumulated infections over years. But it's water, and she needs it, and she drinks. Nothing attacks her. She survives to see noon. And now, with the hardest part of the day, the heat, the predator activity peak, the true test of survival approaching, we need to understand something crucial about Lucy's world. She lives in a time of transition, not just in her own evolutionary position between ape and human, but in Earth's climate. The Pliocene epoch, which began 5.3 million years ago and will end 2.6 million years from now, is a time of gradual cooling and drying. The lush forests of the Miocene are giving way to more open habitats, creating selection pressure for any ape lineage that can adapt to life in less arboreal environments. This is the environmental context that shapes Lucy's anatomy and behavior. She is not an ape forced out of the trees by disappearing forests. She is an ape whose ancestors began experimenting with terrestrial living even while trees were still abundant, and that early experimentation positioned her lineage to survive and thrive as forests became more fragmented. It's evolutionary pre-adaptation, a concept crucial to understanding how major transitions occur. Lucy's bipedalism didn't evolve to allow her species to survive in savannas. But once bipedalism existed, it allowed her species to exploit savanna environments more effectively than their quadrupedal cousins could. The sun reaches its apex. The temperature soars above 35 degrees Celsius, 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Lucy and her group retreat to the shade of a large acacia tree, joining several other individuals, perhaps 15 or 20 Australopithecines total, representing multiple family groups or reproductive units that travel together for enhanced protection. This is the social world that shaped human evolution, and we need to understand it before we continue Lucy's story. The social web. Midday, 3.2 million years ago. The acacia shade offers little relief. Heat radiates from the baked earth, shimmering in waves that distort the horizon. Lucy sits with her back against the rough bark, her breathing shallow and rapid, panting, though not quite like a dog. She lacks the sophisticated evaporative cooling system that will one day allow modern humans to run marathons in the desert. She has sweat glands, yes, but fewer than you or I possess. Her thermoregulation is better than a chimpanzee's, but worse than a modern human's. Another compromise, another halfway solution. Around her, the group settles into the peculiar stillness of midday survival. This is the social laboratory where everything that matters about human evolution is being tested. Look carefully at who's sitting where. This isn't random. Nothing in evolution is random. The spatial distribution of these 15 or 20 individuals tells a story about kinship, dominance, alliance, and reproductive strategy. All the forces that will eventually shape human societies, but are here working in their rawest, most primitive form. Lucy sits closest to two other females, both roughly her age. One of them, we'll call her Dinknesh, the Amharic word meaning "you are marvelous," which is actually Lucy's official name in Ethiopia, is grooming Lucy with focused attention. She picks through Lucy's coarse hair, removing parasites, dead skin, small bits of plant debris. Her fingers work methodically, and when she finds something edible, a tick, a louse, she pops it into her mouth without ceremony. This is social grooming, one of the most important behaviors in primate social life. But it's not really about hygiene. It's about building bonds. It's about alliance maintenance. It's about saying, through touch and time investment, I value you. I will support you. We are connected. In chimpanzee societies, grooming patterns predict coalitionary support during conflicts. Individuals who groom each other frequently will intervene on each other's behalf when threatened. The same principle almost certainly operates here, among Lucy's kind. But there's something else happening too. Something we can only infer from comparative primatology and the fragmentary fossil record. Notice the males. There are fewer of them, perhaps 5 or 6 males among the 15 or 20 individuals present. This sex ratio imbalance tells us something important. Australopithecus afarensis had significant sexual dimorphism. Males were substantially larger than females, perhaps 40 to 50% heavier, a pattern suggesting intense male-male competition for reproductive access to females. The largest male, we'll call him Goliath, though even he stands only about 5 feet tall, sits slightly apart from the main group. His canines, while small by chimpanzee standards, are still larger than the females. His brow ridges are more pronounced. His overall build is more robust, more muscular, despite the species' generally gracile frame. He's watching Lucy. This is where we need to talk about sex and reproduction in Australopithecines, because this is where the evolutionary pressures that shaped our lineage become most intense and most fascinating. How did Lucy and her kind reproduce? What were their mating systems? Were they monogamous pair bonders like modern humans claim to be? Were they promiscuous like chimpanzees, where females mate with multiple males during estrus? Were they harem-building polygynists like gorillas, where dominant males monopolize access to multiple females? The fossil evidence suggests something in between, a flexible mating system that incorporated elements of all 3 strategies. The sexual dimorphism indicates significant male-male competition, suggesting polygyny where successful males mated with multiple females. But the reduced canine size compared to species like gorillas suggests that competition was becoming less about direct physical combat and more about other factors, perhaps coalition building, perhaps resource provisioning, perhaps early forms of courtship display. Here's what we think happened, based on decades of research. Australopithecine females didn't advertise their fertility with the massive sexual swellings that chimpanzee females display during estrus. The pelvic anatomy of Lucy and her kind shows no evidence of the dramatic tissue expansion that makes female chimpanzees' reproductive status visible from 100 meters away. This concealed ovulation, or at least reduced advertisement of fertility, is significant. It changes the game entirely. When female fertility is concealed, males can't simply wait for obvious signals and then compete for access. Instead, they need to maintain closer, longer-term associations with females. They need to guard them, provision them, form bonds with them. This creates selection pressure for pair bonding behaviors, for extended male parental investment, for the beginnings of the reproductive strategy that will eventually characterize modern humans. But Lucy's species isn't fully there yet. They're experimenting, testing different strategies, operating in that evolutionary space where multiple solutions are being tried simultaneously. Watch what happens next. Goliath stands and begins walking toward Lucy. His gait is confident, his posture erect. He's displaying, making himself appear as large and impressive as possible. As he approaches, Lucy stops grooming with Dinknesh and watches him carefully. Her body language shifts, not quite fear, not quite submission, but certainly awareness that a male twice her weight demands attention. Goliath sits beside her, closer than social convention among unrelated individuals would normally permit. He reaches out and touches her shoulder, a gesture that looks almost human in its deliberateness, its suggestion of intentionality. Lucy tolerates this contact. This tolerance is significant. It suggests an existing relationship, a bond that has been established through previous interactions. Maybe Goliath is the father of Lucy's previous offspring. Yes, she has reproduced before, successfully raising at least one juvenile to independence, as evidenced by the wear patterns on her pelvis and the calcium depletion in her bones. Maybe Goliath has provisioned her in the past, sharing food or providing protection. Maybe they're simply familiar with each other, comfortable in each other's presence. Or maybe, and this is where the story becomes more complex, Lucy is engaging in a sophisticated social strategy that we see in modern primates, but can only infer in extinct ones. She might be maintaining relationships with multiple males, accepting grooming and association from several potential mates, keeping her reproductive options open while ensuring that multiple males have a vested interest in protecting her and any offspring she produces. This confused paternity strategy works in chimpanzees and bonobos, where females mate with multiple males, making it unclear which male fathered which infant, thus reducing the risk of infanticide, a threat that haunts primate societies where males sometimes kill infants to bring females back into reproductive condition more quickly. The truth is, we don't know exactly what's happening in this interaction between Lucy and Goliath. We can observe the behavior through the lens of paleoanthropology, but we can't read minds, can't decode intentions, can't fully reconstruct the social calculus that Lucy and her peers navigated every day. What we do know is this: the social bonds being formed here, in the shade of an acacia tree 3.2 million years ago, are the foundation upon which everything that makes us human will eventually be built. The grooming continues for another hour. The heat gradually becomes less intense. The group stirs, individuals beginning to move, to vocalize, to prepare for the afternoon's activities. This is when the juveniles become interesting. There are 3 young individuals in the group, ranging from perhaps 3 to 7 years old, immature but mobile, dependent but capable. Watch how they interact with adults, because this reveals something crucial about learning, culture, and the transmission of knowledge across generations. The oldest juvenile, a female we'll call Little One, approaches Lucy while Goliath is still sitting nearby. Little One carries something in her hand, a stone, roughly the size of a tennis ball, with sharp edges. She's been hitting this stone against another rock, creating flakes, though not in any systematic way. She's experimenting, playing, testing what happens when hard objects collide. Lucy watches but doesn't intervene. This is important. She's not teaching in any explicit sense, not demonstrating technique, not correcting errors, not providing verbal instruction, but she's tolerating the juvenile's presence, allowing her to observe, creating the social context in which learning can occur through observation and imitation. This is protoculture, the beginning of cultural transmission. Here's what we know about tool use in Australopithecines. For decades, we believed they didn't use tools at all. The oldest definitively dated stone tools, sharp-edged flakes created by deliberately striking one rock against another, came from sites dating to 2.6 million years ago, almost 600,000 years after Lucy's time. These tools were attributed to early Homo species, suggesting that tool manufacture was the key innovation that separated humans from earlier hominins. But recent discoveries have complicated this story dramatically. In 2010, researchers found fossil animal bones from Dakika, Ethiopia, dating to 3.4 million years ago, right around Lucy's time, with distinctive cut marks and percussion damage consistent with stone tool use. The marks show that someone used sharp stones to cut meat from bones and hammered bones to access marrow. Then, in 2015, researchers discovered actual stone tools from Lemekwi, Kenya, dating to 3.3 million years ago. Crude, simple, but unmistakably intentional. These discoveries suggest that Lucy and her kind were already using stones as tools, even if they weren't manufacturing sophisticated implements. They were breaking bones to access marrow, using stones to dig for tubers, perhaps using rocks as weapons or tools for processing plant materials. This changes everything. It means that tool use isn't what made us human. It's what made us hominins. It's a deeper, more fundamental part of our lineage than we previously thought. Watch Little One with her stone. She's not just playing. She's learning through trial and error, developing the hand-eye coordination, the kinesthetic sense, the problem-solving skills that will allow her to survive in a world where being able to process food resources that other species can't access provides a crucial competitive advantage. But here's the question that haunts evolutionary anthropology. Is she smart enough to teach? Can she hold in her mind a mental representation of what she wants to achieve and then deliberately demonstrate that technique to another individual? Can she recognize when someone else doesn't understand and modify her behavior to help them learn? These capacities, theory of mind, teaching, the ability to model others' mental states, are considered hallmarks of human cognition. We see them in modern humans starting around age 4 or 5. We see limited versions in great apes under experimental conditions. But we don't know when they evolved, don't know if Lucy possessed them, don't know at what point our lineage crossed the threshold from merely intelligent to cognitively modern. The fossil record can't answer these questions. Skulls and bones tell us about brain size, but not about brain organization, about behavior, but not about cognition, about what individuals did, but not about what they thought. So we're left with inference, with educated guessing, with building probabilistic models from comparative primatology, and trying to project backwards across millions of years of evolutionary time. My guess, and it is only a guess, is that Lucy possessed sophisticated social intelligence, but limited technical intelligence. She was brilliant at reading social situations, at tracking relationships, at remembering who helped whom and who owed what to whom. She was adequate at solving physical problems like, how do I reach that fruit? Or, which rock breaks bones better? But she wasn't yet capable of the kind of abstract, generative thinking that characterizes modern human cognition. She couldn't plan months into the future. She couldn't imagine alternative scenarios and reason about which was most likely. She couldn't teach in any explicit sense, couldn't use language to explain concepts, couldn't think about thinking itself. But she could learn, she could remember, she could adapt, and that was enough. The afternoon wears on. The group begins moving again, leaving the shade of the acacia, heading toward a cluster of trees about 1 kilometer away. This movement is purposeful, not wandering, but traveling toward a known destination. This suggests cognitive mapping, the ability to form mental representations of spatial relationships. Lucy knows where she is and where she's going. She's navigated this territory before, has learned the locations of important resources, can orient herself using landmarks. Research on chimpanzee spatial cognition suggests that great apes possess sophisticated mental maps of their territories, can take novel routes to familiar destinations, can even take shortcuts through unfamiliar terrain by extrapolating from known locations. Lucy almost certainly had similar capacities, perhaps not quite as sophisticated as a modern human's GPS-level spatial awareness, but far beyond simple stimulus-response navigation. As the group travels, they spread out slightly, maintaining visual contact, but not moving in a tight formation. This spacing reflects a trade-off between predation risk and feeding competition. Travel close together, and you're safer from predators, but competing more intensely for food resources. Spread out, and you access more food, but increase individual predation risk. Lucy finds herself near the front of the group, walking alongside Dinknesh and another female. The three of them maintain their proximity, not accidentally, but through active social choice. They are forming a coalition, a subgroup within the larger group, allies who support each other during conflicts and share access to resources. This is where we need to talk about female bonding in Australopithecines, because this is where some of the most interesting recent research in paleoanthropology has focused. For decades, models of human evolution focused almost exclusively on males. Male hunting, male tool use, male competition, male cooperation. The standard narrative suggested that human evolution was driven by males doing impressive things, while females passively received protection and provisioning. This narrative was always suspect, always more reflective of gender biases in anthropology than of actual evidence. And as more female researchers entered the field and brought different perspectives, the story began changing dramatically. We now understand that female bonding, female coalition building, female resource competition, and female mate choice were equally important, perhaps more important, in shaping human evolution. After all, females are the limiting resource in reproduction. A male can potentially father dozens of offspring, but a female can produce only a limited number in her lifetime. This means that female reproductive strategies, female survival, female social maneuvering are under intense selection pressure. Lucy's relationship with Dinknesh isn't peripheral to the story of human evolution. It's central. Female primates form alliances for multiple reasons: to resist male aggression, to compete against other females for resources, to protect offspring, to gain access to food. In baboons, females with strong social networks have higher offspring survival rates. In chimpanzees, females who maintain grooming relationships with other females are less likely to be targeted by aggressive males. In humans, of course, female friendships are complex, emotionally rich relationships that provide crucial support throughout life. Lucy and Dinknesh are building the prototype of this system. Their grooming, their proximity, their coordinated movement, all of it represents an investment in a social bond that will pay dividends when one of them needs support. But their alliance is about to be tested. The group reaches the cluster of trees, acacias again, with figs and other fruiting trees mixed in. This is a rich food patch, the kind of resource that attracts competition. And they're not alone. Another group of Australopithecines, perhaps 10 or 12 individuals, is already feeding here. The two groups spot each other almost simultaneously. Vocalizations erupt, loud, aggressive barking sounds that carry threat displays in acoustic form. This is intergroup competition, one of the most powerful forces shaping primate social evolution. Here's what happens in chimpanzees when two communities encounter each other. If the groups are roughly equal in size, they engage in spectacular displays of aggression, screaming, branch shaking, charging, but rarely make physical contact. The display itself is enough to establish dominance or trigger retreat. But if one group significantly outnumbers the other, violence erupts. Chimpanzees engage in lethal raids, killing members of rival communities, sometimes systematically eliminating neighboring groups to expand territory. Do Australopithecines behave the same way? We don't know for certain, but evidence suggests they might. Fossil remains of Australopithecines show signs of trauma consistent with interpersonal violence, healed fractures, bone damage, even potentially fatal injuries. Some researchers interpret this as evidence of aggression between groups or within groups. Others suggest alternative explanations: falls from trees, predator attacks, accidents. The debate continues, but one thing is clear. Australopithecines lived in a world where violence was a possibility, where competition for resources could escalate beyond display into physical conflict. Watch what happens here, at this fruit tree, as the two groups face each other. The males move to the front. Goliath and two other large males from Lucy's group position themselves between the females and the rival group. Their posturing is dramatic, standing fully upright, which makes them appear larger, raising their arms, slapping the ground, vocalizing aggressively. The rival males respond in kind. For several minutes, the two groups engage in a spectacular display of threat and counter-threat, a ritualized violence that communicates strength without requiring actual combat. And then, something interesting happens. One of the females from the rival group vocalizes differently, not aggressively, but with a softer, more conciliatory tone. Dinknesh responds. The two females approach each other while the males continue their displays. They touch briefly, hand to shoulder, a gesture that diffuses tension. They know each other. This is crucial. This female from the rival group was probably born in Lucy's group and transferred to her current group when she reached reproductive maturity. This is the pattern we see in chimpanzees and most other primates. Females transfer between groups at adolescence to avoid inbreeding, while males typically remain in their natal groups. If Australopithecines followed this pattern, and the genetic evidence from modern humans suggests our ancestors did, then intergroup encounters weren't always hostile. They were also opportunities for social connection, for information exchange, for maintaining relationships across group boundaries. The tension gradually dissipates. The two groups don't merge, but they tolerate each other's presence at the food resource. They're feeding from the same trees, but maintaining spatial distance, a negotiated peace based on mutual recognition and the calculus that fighting isn't worth the risk of injury. Lucy and her companions feed on figs for another hour, sharing the patch with the rival group. This coexistence isn't friendship, it's détente, a temporary cessation of hostilities based on pragmatic assessment of costs and benefits. But it's also something more. It's evidence of cognitive sophistication, of the ability to distinguish between situations that require aggression and situations that permit cooperation, of flexible social strategies that adapt to circumstances. This flexibility, this ability to modulate aggression based on context, is one of the cognitive foundations that will eventually allow humans to build large-scale cooperative societies. We're not watching it being invented here. It's already ancient by Lucy's time, inherited from millions of years of primate social evolution. But we are watching it operate, watching how it works in practice, watching the raw material from which human social complexity will eventually emerge. As the sun begins its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that Lucy cannot appreciate aesthetically, but responds to physiologically, the group begins its most dangerous journey of the day, the return to sleeping trees. This is when predators hunt. This is when the killing happens. The group moves together now, tightly clustered, with the largest males on the perimeter and females with juveniles in the center. This formation isn't planned in any conscious sense. No one gave orders. No one assigned positions. It emerges spontaneously from simple rules. Stay close to your allies. Keep vulnerable individuals protected. Position yourself based on your size and strength. It's self-organization, the kind of emergent complexity that arises from simple interactions between individuals following simple rules. Flocking birds do it. Schooling fish do it. And here, 3.2 million years ago, Lucy's group does it too. The journey back takes 40 minutes, an agonizing period when every rustle in the grass, every shadow in the fading light, every distant sound could signal danger. And then, it does. A roar. Close. Too close. The group freezes. Every head turns toward the sound. In the tall grass, perhaps 50 meters away, something large moves. A tawny shape, low to the ground, stalking. Dinofelis, the false saber-toothed cat. an ambush predator that specialized in hunting primates, with jaws powerful enough to crush Australopithecine skulls, with hunting strategies sophisticated enough to have shaped human evolution through predation pressure. This is the nightmare that haunts Lucy's species. This is the monster in the dark. This is death on 4 legs. The group responds instantly, not with flight, not yet, but with coordinated alarm calling. Multiple individuals vocalize simultaneously, creating a cacophony of warning sounds that serve multiple purposes. Alert group members, confuse the predator, potentially attract other predators that might compete with or disrupt the hunt. The Dinofelis pauses, evaluating. It's hunting alone. These cats are solitary, unlike lions, which means it needs to select a single target and isolate it from the group. Against a coordinated group of 15 Australopithecines, even this apex predator faces risk. Australopithecines aren't defenseless. They're not large, but they're numerous. They can throw rocks. They can mob attackers if forced to fight. The standoff lasts seconds that feel like hours. And then the cat turns and melts back into the grass. Not giving up, not frightened, just recognizing that this particular hunting opportunity isn't optimal. It will try again elsewhere when odds are better. The group doesn't celebrate. They don't feel relief in any way we'd recognize. They simply continue moving. Faster now, urgency overriding caution. Lucy's heart, yes, her heart, anatomically similar to yours, pounds in her chest. Adrenaline floods her system. Her muscles are primed for flight, for climbing, for whatever desperate measure survival might require. But she doesn't need those measures. Not today. Not yet. The group reaches the sleeping trees as full darkness descends. One by one, individuals climb to their sleeping platforms, 15 feet above the ground, above the reach of most predators, and the relative safety of the branches. Lucy climbs last, her body exhausted from a day of walking, foraging, navigating social complexities, and facing death. She arranges her sleeping platform, breaking small branches to create a slightly more comfortable surface. This behavior, nest building, is shared with great apes, but Lucy does it on the ground of trees rather than high in the canopy, a compromise reflecting her semi-terrestrial lifestyle. She settles in as the sounds of the African night emerge, the coughing of hyenas, the distant roar of predators, the chirping of insects, the rustling of nocturnal animals beginning their own dramas of survival. And somewhere in that small skull, behind those large eyes, something we might cautiously call consciousness flickers. Does she remember the day? Does she anticipate tomorrow? Does she experience anything we'd recognize as thought, as inner life, as subjective experience? We don't know. We can never know. But she survived. She made it through one more day in a world that killed most of her peers before they reached reproductive age. She navigated social complexities, avoided predators, found food, maintained alliances, and lived to see another sunset. That's enough. That has to be enough. Tomorrow, she'll do it all again. And the day after that, and the day after that. Until one day, perhaps years from now, perhaps tomorrow, she won't. But tonight, she sleeps. And in her sleep, the future of humanity rests in those bones, in those genes, in that small brain that doesn't yet know what it will become. The Night Watchers, dusk to dawn, 3.2 million years ago. Night in the Pliocene is not the domesticated darkness you know. There are no street lights, no porch lamps, No glowing screens to push back the shadows. There is only the moon when it rises, and the stars, brilliant and uncountable in a sky unmarred by light pollution that won't exist for millions of years. And there are eyes, watching. Lucy shifts on her sleeping platform, trying to find a position that doesn't press her body against the harder branches. Sleep doesn't come easily. It never does. The night is too full of sounds, too saturated with threats, too fundamentally dangerous for any small primate to truly relax. But here's something remarkable that recent research has revealed. Lucy and her kind sleep differently than chimpanzees, differently than gorillas, differently than any other great ape. And their sleep patterns are the first step toward the bizarre, uniquely human sleep architecture that you experience every night. Let me explain why this matters. Chimpanzees sleep approximately 11 to 12 hours per night in long, uninterrupted bouts. Gorillas sleep even longer, up to 13 hours. Their sleep is efficient, predictable, and, crucially, mostly unguarded. A chimpanzee in its nest is vulnerable but relatively safe because they build their sleeping platforms high in trees where few predators can reach them, and they sleep so deeply that they're difficult to wake. But Australopithecines face a different problem. They sleep lower in trees, only 10 to 15 feet up compared to 30 to 50 feet for chimpanzees, because their increased body weight and reduced climbing specializations make sleeping in the thin outer branches of tall trees impossible. This lower sleeping position means greater predation risk, and that risk has driven a revolutionary change in sleep architecture. Lucy sleeps lighter. She wakes more frequently. Her sleep cycles are shorter, approximately 60 to 70 minutes compared to 90 to 120 minutes for chimpanzees. And here's the crucial innovation. Her group practices coordinated sleep patterns, where different individuals wake at different times throughout the night, creating a distributed sentinel system. This is proto-vigilance, the beginning of the watch-taking behavior that will eventually characterize human camping groups. No one teaches it. No one plans it. It emerges from simple individual differences in sleep timing that happen to enhance group survival. Individuals whose sleep patterns naturally stagger relative to others are more likely to survive predation events and pass on whatever genetic or developmental factors influence their sleep timing. Over hundreds of thousands of years, natural selection has been tuning Australopithecine sleep patterns the way a watchmaker tunes a clock, making adjustments measured in minutes of phase shifting, in slightly shorter REM cycles, in marginally increased arousal sensitivity. The result is this. Right now, at approximately 10 p.m., Lucy is in light sleep, while Goliath, 20 feet away in another tree, is wide awake, scanning the darkness with those large, night-adapted eyes. 2 hours from now, their states will reverse. Lucy will wake, will spend 30 minutes in quiet vigilance, while Goliath sinks into deeper sleep. They don't know they're doing this. They don't coordinate consciously. But the pattern exists, and it keeps them alive. Let's pause Lucy's story for a moment and zoom out, way out, because we need to understand the night through the eyes of the creatures who own it. Africa after dark belongs to the predators. The same landscape that Lucy walked through in daylight transforms at night into a killing field where specialized nocturnal hunters operate with terrifying efficiency. These aren't the predators you know from nature documentaries about modern Africa. Many of these species are extinct now, evolutionary experiments that died out when their prey populations collapsed or when climate changes disrupted their hunting grounds. But in Lucy's time, they rule the darkness. Dinofelis, the false saber-tooth we encountered earlier, is one of them, but not the most dangerous. At 200 to 250 pounds, Dinofelis is a specialist primate hunter, but it's relatively small compared to other predators in this ecosystem. Far more terrifying is Pachycrocuta, a giant hyena species that will survive for another 1,000,000 years before going extinct. This creature weighs up to 400 pounds, nearly twice the size of modern spotted hyenas, with jaws powerful enough to crack open elephant bones. Its bite force, estimated at over 800 pounds per square inch, can crush an Australopithecine skull like you'd crack a walnut. And then there are the cats. Multiple species of saber-toothed felids stalk these woodlands and grasslands. Meganterion, with its blade-like canines, specializes in slashing attacks to the throat and belly of prey. Homotherium, the scimitar cat, hunts in prides like modern lions, but with even more sophisticated cooperative strategies. These predators don't just hunt randomly. They know where prey sleeps. They've learned over countless generations that small primates cluster in certain trees, at certain heights, in predictable patterns. They patrol these areas. They wait. They watch for opportunities. And tonight, they're out there, somewhere in the darkness beyond Lucy's sleeping tree. Lucy wakes, not fully, not to complete consciousness, but to that liminal state between sleep and waking, where the brain is processing threat assessment without engaging higher cognitive functions. Her ears catch a sound, soft padding, rhythmic, quadrupedal, something moving below her tree. Her eyes open. She doesn't move otherwise. Movement attracts attention, creates sound, signals vulnerability. She simply watches, trying to resolve shapes in the darkness. The moon hasn't risen yet. Starlight provides minimal illumination, enough for her night-adapted vision to detect motion, but not enough for detailed identification. The sounds continue. Snuffling, the scrape of claws on bark, an investigative exploration. It's a hyena. Not the giant Pachycrocuta. This one's smaller, perhaps a brown hyena, opportunistically checking sleeping trees for vulnerable prey, for juveniles who might have fallen, for sick or injured individuals whose grip on branches might be weakening. Lucy remains absolutely still. Her heart rate increases, not to panic levels, not yet, but to readiness levels. Adrenaline trickles into her bloodstream. Her muscles tense slightly, preparing for the possibility of climbing higher, of fleeing to thinner branches where her lighter weight gives her an advantage over heavier predators who might attempt to follow. But the hyena doesn't climb. It circles the tree base, sniffs extensively, then moves on. It's searching for easier prey, for ground-dwelling animals, for carcasses left by other predators. Lucy remains awake for another 20 minutes, listening to the hyena's sounds fade into the distance, making sure there are no other immediate threats. Only when the all-clear signal comes, the resumption of normal night sounds, the chirping of insects, the calls of nocturnal birds, does she allow herself to sink back towards sleep. This cycle repeats 3 or 4 times throughout the night. Each awakening is slightly different. Once for a sound that turns out to be nothing. Once for an unidentified rustling that triggers group-wide alertness. once for distant roaring that might be lions establishing territorial claims. Each awakening burns calories. Each adrenaline surge has metabolic costs. Each sleep interruption reduces the restorative quality of rest. But the alternative, uninterrupted deep sleep, would be fatal. The trade-off is worth it. This is the economic calculation that evolution performs automatically. Spend energy on vigilance or risk death by predation. The math is simple. The implementation is hardwired into Lucy's nervous system through millions of years of selection. Let's talk about what's happening inside Lucy's brain while she sleeps, because this is where some of the most fascinating recent discoveries about Australopithecine neurobiology emerge. Lucy's brain is small, approximately 400 to 500 cubic centimeters, about the size of a chimpanzee's brain, roughly 1/3 the size of yours. For decades, this small brain size led researchers to assume that Australopithecines were cognitively limited, barely more sophisticated than modern great apes. But brain size isn't everything. What matters is brain organization, neural connectivity, the ratio of different brain regions, and the metabolic resources available to support brain function. Recent analyses of Australopithecine endocasts, fossilized impressions of brain surfaces preserved inside skull cavities, reveal something unexpected. The frontal lobes of Lucy's brain are proportionally larger than a chimpanzee's, though not as large as a modern human's. The temporal lobes, associated with memory and social cognition, show expansion. The angular gyrus region, critical for tool use and possibly for some aspects of language processing, is beginning to enlarge. These changes are subtle. We're not talking about dramatic reorganization, but we are talking about the first steps toward the brain architecture that will eventually support human cognition. And here's where it gets really interesting. While Lucy sleeps, her brain is consolidating memories. All mammals sleep, but the specific function of sleep remains partially mysterious. We know it's essential. Deprive any mammal of sleep long enough, and they die. We know it serves multiple functions: metabolic restoration, immune system maintenance, toxin clearance from the brain. But one of the most important functions of sleep, particularly REM, rapid eye movement sleep, is memory consolidation. During sleep, the brain replays experiences from the day, transferring information from short-term to long-term memory, strengthening important neural connections and pruning less important ones. This process literally rewires the brain based on daily experiences. Lucy experiences REM sleep. We can tell from her sleep architecture, from comparative mammalian biology. And during that REM sleep, her brain is replaying the events of her day, the fig trees and their locations, the social interaction with Goliath, the near encounter with Dinofelis, the intergroup meeting at the food resource. These experiences are being encoded into long-term memory, creating the cognitive map of her territory, the social knowledge of her group members, the learned avoidance of dangerous situations. This is how she becomes smarter without her brain getting bigger. This is how culture, in its most primitive form, begins to accumulate across generations. Each individual doesn't need to learn everything through direct experience. They can learn vicariously, by observing others, and their sleeping brain consolidates these observations into usable knowledge. It's not yet the sophisticated social learning that characterizes modern humans. Lucy can't think about thinking, can't explicitly teach, can't use language to share complex ideas. But she can learn by watching, and she can remember what she's learned. And that's enough to begin the process that will eventually lead to cumulative cultural evolution. Midnight passes. The moon rises, a waxing gibbous, providing substantial illumination across the landscape. The increased light changes everything. For Lucy, moonlight means improved visibility and slightly reduced predation risk. She can see potential threats earlier, can navigate branches more easily if she needs to climb higher or move between trees. But for the predators, moonlight means improved hunting conditions. They can see prey more clearly, can coordinate group hunts more effectively, can pursue targets across greater distances. It's an arms race, an evolutionary battle between hunter and hunted that plays out in the architecture of eyes, in the timing of activity patterns, in the behavioral strategies of both predator and prey. And tonight, under the rising moon, the balance is about to shift. 3 hours past midnight, Lucy is in deep sleep, her breathing slow and regular, her body finally achieving the restorative rest it desperately needs after a long day of activity. She doesn't hear the soft footfalls approaching her tree. She doesn't see the tawny form that materializes from the shadows, moving with the fluid silence that only specialized predators achieve. It's the Dinofelis from earlier, the same individual or another from its territory, we can't know. But what matters is that it's back, and this time it's found prey that isn't in a defensive formation, isn't alert, isn't surrounded by vigilant group members. The cat pauses at the base of Lucy's tree, calculating. It's not looking at Lucy. She's too high, too far out on branches that won't support a 200-pound cat. But there's a juvenile sleeping lower, a young male, perhaps 5 years old, on a branch only 8 feet above the ground. The Dinofelis begins to climb, slowly, testing each placement of its large paws. Its claws, semi-retractable unlike modern cats, dig into bark. Its powerful shoulder muscles bunch and release, hauling its body upward with remarkable silence. This is the nightmare scenario. This is how Australopithecines die most frequently. Not in dramatic chases across the savanna, not in violent confrontations, but quietly, in the night, plucked from sleeping trees by predators who've learned to climb just high enough to reach the most vulnerable individuals. The juvenile wakes when the cat is 3 feet away. His scream shatters the night, a shriek of pure terror that triggers instant response from every Australopithecine in the vicinity. Lucy explodes from sleep, her body responding before her conscious mind has time to process what's happening. All around her, individuals are screaming, moving, creating chaos. The Dinofelis lunges for the juvenile. It's committed now, past the point where retreat is an option. But the juvenile is small, light, and terror makes him impossibly fast. He scrambles higher, climbing to branches too thin for the cat to follow. The cat's weight shifts. The branch it's on begins to bend, to crack. For a moment, the predator has a choice. Continue pursuing prey on branches that might not support it, or retreat to the ground. Evolution has taught Dinofelis that discretion is the better part of valor. It descends rapidly, dropping the last few feet to the ground, and vanishes into the darkness. The juvenile is alive. Traumatized, certainly, his heart racing, his body shaking with adrenaline, but alive. The group remains in chaos for another 10 minutes. Individuals are calling, moving between branches, seeking physical contact with each other for reassurance. This isn't just random panic. This is coordinated threat response, information sharing, collective reassurance that the danger has passed. Lucy finds herself near Dinknesh again. They touch briefly, hand to arm, a gesture of comfort. Neither of them thinks consciously about what just happened. They don't have words for concepts like close call or lucky escape. But they feel something, relief perhaps, or whatever the Australopithecine equivalent of relief might be. Gradually, over the next hour, the group settles again. But sleep comes harder now. The interruption has reset everyone's arousal levels, making them hypervigilant, sensitive to every sound. This is the cost of predation pressure. This is the environment that shaped human evolution, not through constant dramatic attacks, but through the chronic stress of living in a world where death can arrive silently in the night, where vigilance is the price of survival, where cooperation and social bonds are literally the difference between life and death. The final hours before dawn are the quietest. Predators have largely returned to their dens. The nocturnal animals are winding down their activities. The world holds its breath, waiting for sunrise. Lucy sleeps fitfully, her sleep cycle disrupted by the earlier alarm. But she sleeps because she must. Her body needs rest the way it needs food and water, not as a luxury, but as a biological necessity. And while she sleeps, while her small brain processes the day's experiences and consolidates memories and repairs cellular damage, let's take a moment to consider what we're really watching here. We're watching the raw material of human evolution. Everything that makes you human, your large brain, your sophisticated language, your complex technology, your art and music and mathematics, all of it evolved from ancestors like Lucy, who spent their nights terrified in trees, who navigated predation pressure through vigilance and cooperation, who learned by watching and remembered by sleeping. The trajectory from Lucy to you isn't a straight line. It's not inevitable. It's not guided by any cosmic plan or purpose. It's simply the result of natural selection, operating on variation across millions of years, favoring traits that happened to enhance survival and reproduction in specific environmental contexts. Lucy doesn't know she's an ancestor to anything. She doesn't know her species will go extinct within a few 100,000 years, replaced by other hominin lineages that will continue the experiment of bipedal, tool-using intelligence. She doesn't know that some of her genes, not hers personally, but genes from individuals like her, will propagate forward through time, mutating and recombining, eventually ending up in your genome. She only knows this moment, this night, this tree, this struggle to survive one more day. And yet, she's part of a story that's been unfolding for millions of years, that will continue unfolding for millions more. A story that has no author and no ending, but produces meaning anyway through the simple fact of continuing. Dawn approaches. The eastern horizon begins its transformation from black to gray, that same pre-dawn blue that greeted Lucy 24 hours ago. The night sounds fade. Diurnal birds begin their morning calls. The temperature, which dropped significantly during the night, begins its steady climb toward the heat of another African day. Lucy wakes naturally this time, not to threat, but to the biological imperative of circadian rhythms. Her body knows it's time to be awake, time to descend, time to begin the cycle again. She sits up on her platform, her body stiff from a night of interrupted sleep on uncomfortable branches. She stretches, an unconscious behavior she shares with all primates, a way of preparing muscles for movement after hours of relative inactivity. Around her, The group is stirring. Individuals are vocalizing, soft contact calls that say, "I'm here, I survived, we made it through another night." There's a quality to these calls that's almost celebratory, almost relieved, though attributing such complex emotions to Australopithecines is anthropomorphizing beyond what the evidence supports. But they did make it. They survived. And survival deserves acknowledgement, even if that acknowledgement is nothing more than a grunt of recognition. The juvenile, who was nearly taken by the Dinophelus, is sitting close to his mother. Yes, we can infer mother-offspring bonds from comparative primatology, and from the fact that Australopithecine infants would have been dependent for years, creating strong attachment relationships. He's subdued, quieter than usual, his body language suggesting what we might cautiously call fear or anxiety. His mother grooms him extensively, her fingers working through his hair with focused attention. This grooming serves multiple functions. Parasite removal, certainly, but also comfort, reassurance, the physical reinforcement of a social bond that might have been severed last night, but wasn't. This is maternal care, one of the deepest and most powerful forces in mammalian evolution. Natural selection favors mothers who invest heavily in offspring care, who protect their young, who form strong emotional bonds that motivate protective behavior. This maternal instinct, present in Lucy's species and amplified in ours, is part of what makes us human, the capacity to care intensely about another individual's welfare, to sacrifice personal safety for offspring survival, to experience what we might cautiously call love. The sun breaks the horizon. Lucy begins her descent from the sleeping tree, moving carefully, checking her surroundings before committing to the ground. She reaches the base of the tree and stands upright, scanning the landscape with those large eyes, searching for threats. The same landscape that terrified her in darkness looks different now. The morning light reveals details that were hidden at night. The texture of grass, the colors of distant hills, the movement of other animals beginning their daily activities. She survived the night. She's hungry again, thirsty again, ready to begin another day of foraging, socializing, navigating dangers, living the only life she knows. But before we continue following Lucy through a second day, before we watch her repeat the patterns we've already observed, the feeding and grooming and traveling and threat avoidance, we need to step back and ask a more profound question. What does this all mean? What can we learn from watching one individual Australopithecine for 24 hours? What does Lucy's day tell us about human evolution, about the origins of our species, about the journey from ape to human? The evolutionary crucible, understanding the forces that shaped Lucy's world. Lucy begins walking toward the river, following the same route she took yesterday. But we're not going to follow her this time. Instead, we're going to do something more radical. We're going to pull back, zoom out, and look at the bigger picture. The evolutionary forces, the environmental pressures, the deep time that shaped Lucy's species and will ultimately determine its fate. Because understanding Lucy's day-to-day survival is only the beginning. To truly grasp what we're witnessing, we need to understand the evolutionary crucible that forged Australopithecus afarensis, and why this species represents such a critical pivot point in the story of human origins. Let's start with a question that seems simple, but isn't. Why did bipedalism evolve at all? You walk upright. You probably don't think about it. It's so fundamental to your existence that it seems natural, inevitable, the obvious way for an intelligent creature to move. But from an evolutionary perspective, bipedalism is bizarre. It's energetically expensive, biomechanically challenging, and developmentally problematic. It makes childbirth extraordinarily difficult because upright posture requires a reconfigured pelvis that narrows the birth canal. It makes infants helpless for years because human babies are born neurologically immature. If they were born with fully developed brains like other primates, their heads would be too large to pass through the birth canal. Bipedalism comes with enormous costs. So why did natural selection favor it? For over a century, anthropologists have proposed theories, some elegant, some absurd, all struggling to explain this fundamental innovation. The savanna hypothesis, 1920s to 1980s. This was the dominant theory for decades. It proposed that as African forests gave way to grasslands, our ape ancestors were forced onto the ground, where standing upright allowed them to see predators over tall grass. This theory is neat, intuitive, and almost certainly wrong. We now know that bipedalism evolved before extensive savannas appeared, and Lucy's species lived in mosaic environments with plenty of trees. The thermoregulation hypothesis, 1980s. Standing upright reduces the body surface area exposed to direct sunlight during the hottest part of the day, and elevates the body into cooler air currents above the ground. Mathematical models show this could reduce heat load by 60%. This theory has merit. Thermoregulation is a serious challenge for African mammals, but it doesn't fully explain why bipedalism evolved initially, only why it might have been advantageous once it existed. The provisioning hypothesis, 1980s to 1990s. Bipedalism freed the hands to carry food back to mates and offspring, enabling a reproductive strategy based on male provisioning and pair bonding. This theory connects bipedalism to broader changes in social structure and reproduction, making it more comprehensive than single-factor explanations. The postural feeding hypothesis, 2000s. Our ancestors were already semi-upright while feeding on fruits in small trees and bushes, reaching upward with their hands while their feet supported their body weight. Bipedalism simply extended this existing behavior to terrestrial locomotion. Fossil evidence from earlier species, like Australopithecus, supports this model. The wading hypothesis, 1960s, revived 2010s. Our ancestors spent significant time wading through shallow water, in marshes, lake edges, river crossings, where bipedal posture kept their heads above water and their hands free to gather aquatic food resources. This theory is controversial, but has gained renewed interest as evidence emerges that early hominins exploited aquatic resources more extensively than previously thought. The truth? Probably all of these factors played some role. Evolution doesn't optimize for single variables. It operates on whole organisms in complex environments where multiple selection pressures push and pull simultaneously. What we can say with confidence is this: by Lucy's time, 3.2 million years ago, bipedalism is fully established. Her species is committed to this mode of locomotion, for better or worse. The experiment has moved beyond its testing phase into full implementation. But bipedalism is just the most obvious feature of Lucy's species. To understand what makes Australopithecus afarensis significant, we need to look at the entire suite of adaptations that define them. The Australopithecine Body Plan, a study in compromise. Imagine you're an evolutionary engineer tasked with designing a bipedal ape, What features would you need? First, you'd reconfigure the pelvis. In quadrupedal apes, the pelvis is long and narrow, oriented more vertically, designed to support a horizontal torso.
For bipedalism, you need a shorter, broader pelvis, tilted to support the abdominal organs above it, with the hip joint repositioned to align the femur vertically beneath the body's center of mass. Lucy has this. Her pelvis is remarkably modern in its basic architecture, short, broad, and capable of supporting bipedal walking. But it retains some primitive features. The iliac blades flare outward more than in modern humans. The birth canal is small, and the attachment sites for certain muscles suggest her walking gait was less efficient than ours. Second, you'd reconfigure the legs. The femur needs to angle inward from hip to knee, creating what anatomists call the carrying angle. This allows each foot to land directly under the body's center of gravity rather than off to the side. You'd need a foot with a non-opposable big toe aligned with the other toes, a longitudinal arch for shock absorption, and a heel designed for heel-strike walking. Lucy has most of this. Her femur shows the carrying angle. Her foot structure, revealed by both her fossils and the miraculous Laetoli footprints, shows a modern human walking pattern. But her toes are still slightly curved, a retention from her arboreal ancestors, and her foot lacks the full longitudinal arch that makes human walking so energy efficient. Third, you'd need to reposition the foramen magnum, the hole in the skull where the spinal cord enters the brain. In quadrupeds, this hole is positioned toward the back of the skull. For bipeds, it needs to move forward and down, so the skull balances atop a vertical spine rather than jutting forward from a horizontal one. Lucy has this too. Her foramen magnum is positioned anteriorly, showing that her head balanced atop her spine in the manner of a biped. But here's where it gets interesting. Lucy retains numerous features that seem maladaptive for a committed biped, but make perfect sense for a creature that still needs to climb trees. Long arms relative to leg length, an intermembral index of approximately 85 compared to 72 for modern humans and 100 plus for chimpanzees. Curved finger bones perfect for grasping branches. Relatively mobile shoulder joints that allow extensive overhead reaching. Strong arm bones capable of supporting body weight during climbing. A funnel-shaped rib cage, more ape-like, rather than the barrel-shaped rib cage of modern humans. This mosaic of features, some adapted for bipedalism, others retained for climbing, tells us something crucial. Lucy's species hadn't fully committed to terrestrial life. They were still hedging their bets, still maintaining the ability to escape into trees, still dividing their time between ground and canopy. This is adaptation in real time. This is evolution caught mid-transition, and it's absolutely fascinating. The brain question. Was Lucy smart? Lucy's brain was small. We've established that. At 400 to 500 cubic centimeters, it's roughly chimpanzee-sized, about 1/3 the volume of your 1,350 cc brain. But let's dig deeper into what this means. Brain size isn't everything. What matters more is the ratio of brain size to body size, the encephalization quotient, EQ. A blue whale has a brain 5 times larger than yours, but you're vastly more intelligent because your brain is huge relative to your body size. Lucy's EQ is approximately 2.5, higher than a chimpanzee's, 2.2 to 2.5, but far lower than a modern human's, 7 to 8. This suggests she was somewhat more cognitively sophisticated than modern apes, but nowhere near modern human cognitive capabilities. What could Lucy do with that brain? Based on comparative primatology, endocast analysis, archaeological context, and behavioral modeling, here's our best estimate of Lucy's cognitive capabilities. What Lucy could do: recognize dozens of individual group members and track their relationships. Form and maintain complex social alliances. Use simple tools opportunistically. Unmodified stones for breaking, sticks for digging. Navigate complex terrain using mental maps. Learn through observation and imitation. Communicate emotional states through vocalizations and gestures. Plan simple sequences of actions. Travel to known food sources. Return to sleeping trees. Engage in basic problem solving. How to reach food, how to avoid threats. Experience emotions like fear, anger, affection, possibly grief. What Lucy could not do: use syntactic language with grammar and infinite generativity. Engage in explicit teaching, though she could learn by observation. Plan extensively for the future beyond immediate needs. Create symbolic representations, art, notation, ritual. Systematically manufacture complex tools. Engage in recursive thinking, thinking about thinking. Understand abstract concepts like death, time, causation. Transmit complex cultural information across generations. In other words, Lucy was smart, smarter than modern apes in some ways, but not human smart. She occupied a cognitive middle ground, possessing sophisticated social intelligence and basic problem-solving abilities, but lacking the symbolic thought, language, and cultural transmission that characterize modern humans. This raises a profound question. When did human-level cognition emerge? The fossil record shows that brain size increased gradually over the next 3 million years after Lucy. Australopithecus species, 3 to 2 million years ago, 400 to 550 cc. Early Homo species, 2 to 1.5 million years ago, 600 to 800 cc. Homo erectus, 1.8 million to 300,000 years ago, 800 to 1100 cc. Archaic Homo sapiens, 500,000 to 200,000 years ago, 1200 to 1400 cc. Modern Homo sapiens, 200,000 years ago present, 1200 to 1500 cc. But brain size doesn't directly correlate with cognitive capacity. Neanderthals had larger brains than modern humans, averaging 1500 cc, but may not have been cognitively superior. What matters more is brain organization, the relative sizes of different regions, the density of neural connections, the metabolic resources available to support brain function. The archaeological record provides better clues. Stone tools appear around 3.3 million years ago, possibly made by Lucy's contemporaries. Systematic tool manufacture appears around 2.6 million years ago. Fire control appears around 1 million years ago. Symbolic artifacts, ochre pigments, beads, appear around 100,000 years ago. Fully modern human behavior, art, complex tools, long-distance trade, appears around 50,000 years ago. This suggests that human cognition evolved gradually, in fits and starts, with different cognitive capacities emerging at different times. Lucy represents an early stage in this process, cognitively sophisticated relative to other apes, but barely beginning the journey toward human-level intelligence. The Diet Revolution: What Lucy Ate and Why It Matters. We've watched Lucy eat figs, but what else did she consume? And how does her diet relate to her evolutionary trajectory? For decades, scientists assumed Australopithecines were primarily frugivorous, fruit eaters like chimpanzees. But recent evidence has completely overturned this view.
Isotope analysis of Australopithecine tooth enamel reveals something surprising. Lucy and her kind consumed significant amounts of C4 plants, grasses, sedges, and the animals that eat them. This contrasts sharply with chimpanzees, who eat almost exclusively C3 plants, fruits, leaves, forest vegetation. What does this mean in practical terms? It means Lucy's diet was incredibly diverse and flexible. She ate fruits when available, figs, berries, other tree fruits, seeds and nuts, protein-rich, requiring strong jaws to crack, roots and tubers, underground storage organs, rich in carbohydrates, leaves and shoots, fibrous, low-quality fallback foods, grasses and sedges, perhaps the seeds rather than the tough blades, animal foods, insects, bird eggs, possibly scavenged meat. This dietary flexibility is crucial. It means Australopithecines could survive in varied environments, exploit seasonal resources, and weather climate fluctuations that might have devastated more specialized species. But this diet also creates challenges. Many of these foods are tough, hard, or difficult to digest. This is why Lucy has large molars with thick enamel for grinding, strong jaw muscles attached to prominent cheekbones, a robust skull capable of handling heavy chewing forces, a large gut, inferred from ribcage shape, for processing fibrous plant materials. Processing these foods takes time and energy. Lucy probably spent 4 to 6 hours per day chewing, less than a gorilla who chews 8+ hours daily on fibrous vegetation, but more than a modern human who processes food with tools and cooking before it enters the mouth. This dietary pattern sets the stage for a revolution that will occur in the next million years: the shift toward higher quality foods, particularly meat, which will provide the dense calories necessary to fuel larger brains. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. In Lucy's time, the meat-eating revolution hasn't fully begun. She's still primarily a plant eater who opportunistically consumes animal foods when available. The climate content: Earth in flux. Now let's zoom out even further to the environmental context that shaped Lucy's evolution. The Pliocene epoch, 5.3 to 2.6 million years ago, was a time of dramatic climate change. Here's what was happening to Earth during Lucy's time. Global cooling. The planet was cooling gradually throughout the Pliocene. Ice sheets were expanding in Antarctica and beginning to form in the Arctic. Sea levels were dropping as water became locked in polar ice. Global average temperatures were 2 to 3 degrees Celsius warmer than today, but trending downward. African aridification. Africa was becoming drier. The lush, continuous forests of the Miocene were fragmenting into mosaic environments, patches of woodland interspersed with grasslands, wetlands, and open scrub. This environmental fragmentation created selection pressure for species that could exploit multiple habitat types. C4 grassland expansion. Between 10 and 3 million years ago, grasslands dominated by C4 grasses, which use a more efficient photosynthetic pathway in hot, dry conditions, expanded dramatically across Africa.
This created vast new habitats, but also new challenges. Grasslands offer less food and cover for tree-dwelling apes. Climate variability. Perhaps most importantly, climate was becoming more variable. Rather than stable warm conditions, East Africa experienced alternating wet and dry periods, driven by orbital cycles that changed the intensity of monsoonal rains. This variability created selection pressure for behavioral and cognitive flexibility. Species that could adapt their behavior to changing conditions survived. Specialists went extinct. This environmental context is crucial for understanding Lucy's evolutionary position. She's not adapted to forests or grasslands specifically. She's adapted to variability itself, to an environment where conditions change, where flexibility and adaptability are more valuable than specialized optimization. This is the key insight of variability selection theory, proposed by paleoanthropologist Rick Potts. Human evolution was driven not by adaptation to a specific environment, but by adaptation to environmental unpredictability. The species that survived were those that could adjust their behavior, diet, and habitat use as conditions changed. Lucy's mosaic anatomy, part terrestrial biped, part arboreal climber, makes perfect sense in this context. She's not poorly adapted to any single environment. She's well adapted to a world where environments change, where the ability to exploit multiple niches provides an advantage. The evolutionary timeline. Where does Lucy fit? Let's place Lucy in the broader sweep of hominin evolution. This is complex, so pay attention. The human family tree is bushier than you probably learned in school. 7 to 6 million years ago, the hominin lineage splits from the chimpanzee lineage. The earliest potential hominins, Sahelanthropus chadensis and Auroran tugenensis, appear in the fossil record. Evidence for bipedalism is controversial but suggestive. 5 to 4 million years ago, Ardipithecus ramidus lives in Ethiopian forests. This species shows clear evidence of facultative bipedalism, walking upright sometimes but not exclusively, combined with extensive adaptations for tree climbing. They're experimenting with bipedalism but haven't committed to it. 4 to 3 million years ago, Australopithecus anamensis appears, the first definitive Australopithecine with clear anatomical evidence for committed bipedalism. This is likely the ancestor of Lucy's species. 3.9 to 2.9 million years ago, Australopithecus afarensis, Lucy's species, flourishes across East Africa. They're successful, widespread, and morphologically diverse, suggesting they occupied various ecological niches. 3.5 to 2.5 million years ago, multiple Australopithecine species coexist in Africa. Australopithecus africanus in South Africa, Australopithecus barrel-ghazali in Central Africa, and eventually the robust Australopithecines, Paranthropus species, who developed massive jaws and teeth for processing tough plant foods. 2.8 to 1.5 million years ago, the genus Homo emerges, species like Homo habilis and Homo rudolfensis, with slightly larger brains and evidence of systematic tool manufacture. The hominin lineage is now branching extensively, with multiple species experimenting with different adaptive strategies. 1.8 million years ago present, Homo erectus appears, the first hominin with modern body proportions, the first to leave Africa, the first with clear evidence of sophisticated tool use and possibly fire control. This species represents a major transition toward modern human anatomy and behavior. 300,000 years ago present, Homo sapiens evolves in Africa. We're the last surviving branch of a once diverse evolutionary bush that included Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo floresiensis, and other species that have all gone extinct. Where does this leave Lucy? She's near the base of the Australopithecine radiation, living at a time when hominins were diversifying into multiple lineages. Her species, Australopithecus afarensis, probably gave rise to later Australopithecines and possibly to early Homo species, though the exact relationships remain debated. What's clear is that Lucy is not on a straight evolutionary path to modern humans. She's on one branch of a bushy tree, and many of those branches, including likely her own, lead to extinction, not to us. The extinction question. What happened to Lucy's species? Australopithecus afarensis goes extinct around 2.9 million years ago, after existing for approximately 1 million years. A respectable run by evolutionary standards, but hardly a success story compared to species that last tens of millions of years. What happened? We don't know for certain, but we can make educated guesses based on the fossil record and environmental context. Climate change. Around 2.9 to 2.6 million years ago, Africa experienced another major aridification event. Grasslands expanded further, forests contracted more. This environmental shift may have favored different adaptive strategies, either specialization for processing tough grassland foods, leading to the robust Australopithecines with their massive jaws, or increased reliance on tool use and higher quality foods, leading to early Homo species. Competition. Multiple hominin species coexisted during Lucy's time. As resources became scarcer due to climate change, competition intensified. Species with slight advantages, larger brains, better tools, more efficient locomotion, may have outcompeted Lucy's species. Predation. We know predation pressure was intense. Perhaps changes in predator communities or hunting strategies made Lucy's semi-arboreal lifestyle less viable. Evolutionary replacement. Lucy's species may not have gone extinct in the traditional sense. They may have evolved into descendant species that replace them. This is called pseudo-extinction, and it's common in the fossil record. The most likely scenario combines all these factors. Environmental change altered available resources, favoring species with different adaptive strategies, leading to competitive exclusion or evolutionary transformation of Lucy's species. By 2.9 million years ago, Australopithecus afarensis disappears from the fossil record. New species take their place. The evolutionary experiment continues, but in different forms, testing different solutions to the challenges of survival in a changing world. Lucy's species is gone, but their evolutionary legacy persists in descendant lineages, in genes passed forward through time, in the anatomical and behavioral innovations they pioneered. The bigger picture. What Lucy teaches us. So what have we learned from spending 24 hours with Lucy? From watching her eat and sleep and fear and survive? We've learned that human evolution wasn't a straight line from primitive to advanced, from ape to human, from simple to complex. It was a branching bush of evolutionary experiments, most of which failed, but some of which stumbled onto adaptive strategies that worked well enough, long enough, to leave descendants. We've learned that our ancestors weren't waiting to become human. They were simply surviving in the environments they occupied, using the bodies and brains they possessed, living lives that were complete and meaningful in their own terms, not merely preparatory stages for some future humanity. We've learned that the defining features of humanity, bipedalism, large brains, tool use, complex language, culture, didn't evolve all at once in a single revolutionary leap. They evolved gradually, incrementally, in mosaic fashion, with different traits appearing at different times in different lineages. We've learned that evolution is conservative, retaining old features even while building new ones, creating compromise solutions that are good enough rather than optimally designed, because evolution can only work with existing variation and existing body plans. And perhaps most importantly, we've learned humility. Lucy reminds us that we're not the inevitable endpoint of evolution, not the crown of creation, not the purpose toward which the universe was tending. We're simply one branch on a bushy evolutionary tree, one experiment that happened to succeed so far, one species among millions that have existed and will exist. 3.2 million years ago, Lucy lived her life, eating, sleeping, fearing, surviving. She had no idea that paleontologists would one day reconstruct her skeleton, would name her, would make her famous, would use her as a window into human origins. She just lived. And that living, multiplied by millions of individuals across hundreds of thousands of years, shaped the evolutionary trajectory that eventually led to you. You exist because Lucy's ancestors survived. You walk upright because they experimented with bipedalism. You have a large brain because their descendants gradually increased cranial capacity over millions of years. You use language because the cognitive foundations for symbolic thought were being laid, brick by brick, in brains like Lucy's. You are her legacy. Not her descendant, probably not, given the bushiness of the hominin tree, but her evolutionary cousin, the distant outcome of experiments begun in her time. Between worlds, the second day, and the meaning of becoming human. The sun rises on Lucy's second day. She descends from her sleeping tree, stands upright on the African soil, and pauses, scanning, listening, calculating the risks of another day in a world that wants to kill her. But we're going to do something different now. We're going to follow Lucy through this second day, not as passive observers, but as active interpreters, asking the deeper questions that her life raises. We're going to explore what it means to be caught between two worlds, between ape and human, between tree and ground, between instinct and intelligence. Because Lucy's story isn't just about one species that lived 3.2 million years ago. It's about transformation itself, about how change happens, how new forms of life emerge from old ones, how the impossible becomes inevitable, given enough time. Dawn, the paradox of potential. Lucy walks toward the river, following the same route she's taken hundreds of times before. Her feet create impressions in the soft soil, not as perfect as the Laetoli footprints which were preserved in volcanic ash and then covered by protective sediment, but real nonetheless. Ephemeral marks that will disappear with the next rain, leaving no trace that she passed this way. This is the paradox of Lucy's existence. She's simultaneously insignificant and monumentally important. As an individual, she's irrelevant to the grand sweep of evolution. Whether she lives or dies today makes almost no difference to the trajectory of her species. She's already reproduced, at least once, possibly twice, so her genetic contribution is established. If she dies today, her genes persist in her offspring.
If she lives another decade, she might reproduce again, but the statistical impact on the gene pool of her species is negligible. And yet, she contains multitudes. Inside Lucy's body, encoded in the DNA of her approximately 37 trillion cells, is information that has been accumulating for billions of years. Genetic sequences inherited from the first prokaryotic cells, from the first eukaryotes, from the first multicellular organisms, from the first vertebrates, from the first mammals, from the first primates, from dozens of extinct hominin species whose names we don't know and whose fossils we'll never find. She is a living library of evolutionary history, a biological archive carrying forward information about what worked in the past, what survived selection, what proved viable across deep time. But she's also something more than just a carrier of information from the past. She's a generator of potential futures. Watch her walk. That bipedal gait, inefficient compared to modern human walking, but revolutionary compared to quadrupedal ape locomotion, opens up possibilities that don't yet exist.
Hands freed from locomotion can carry objects, can manipulate tools, can gesture and communicate in ways that will eventually support language. A body built for walking long distances can range across territories that tree-bound apes cannot access, can follow migrating herds, can explore new environments. Lucy doesn't know any of this. She can't see the future. She has no concept that her anatomy represents a transitional form between ape and human. She simply walks because walking is what her body does, what her ancestors did, what natural selection has shaped her lineage to do. But the potential is there, dormant, waiting for the right environmental pressures and genetic mutations to activate it. This is what evolution looks like from the inside. Not a grand march of progress towards some predetermined goal, but billions of individuals simply living, simply surviving, simply reproducing, and in that simple persistence, creating the raw material for transformation. Morning, the social brain. Lucy reaches the river and drinks. Around her, other members of her group are also drinking, also scanning for threats, also beginning another day of navigating the complex social landscape that defines their existence. Let's talk about what's happening inside Lucy's brain right now, because this is where some of the most profound evolutionary changes are occurring. Changes invisible in the fossil record. Changes that leave no trace in bones, but that are reshaping the trajectory of the hominin lineage. Lucy is tracking social information at a level of complexity that would overwhelm most mammals. She knows who is allied with whom, who has helped her in the past, and who hasn't, which individuals are higher ranking and should be deferred to, which individuals are lower ranking and can be displaced from resources, who is related to whom, which males have mated with which females, which juveniles belong to which mothers, who is currently in good health, and who is showing signs of weakness. She doesn't think about this information consciously the way you might review a mental database. She doesn't have language to label relationships or explicit theories about social structure. But the information is there, encoded in neural networks, accessible through pattern recognition and emotional responses that guide her behavior automatically. This is social intelligence, and it's extraordinarily computationally expensive. Here's a fascinating fact. Across primate species, there's a strong correlation between social group size and neocortex ratio, the size of the neocortex relative to the rest of the brain. Anthropologist Robin Dunbar discovered this relationship and used it to predict that humans, with our large neocortices, should naturally form social groups of approximately 150 individuals, a number that shows up repeatedly in human societies, from hunter-gatherer bands to modern military units to the average number of people we maintain genuine relationships with on social media. The implication is profound. Brains don't evolve to be large because of tool use or language or complex technology. They evolve to be large because of social complexity.
Living in groups creates computational challenges that aren't present for solitary animals.
You need to recognize dozens of individuals and remember your history with each. You need to track third-party relationships, who is allied with whom. You need to predict others' behavior based on their goals and knowledge. You need to cooperate, compete, form alliances, detect cheaters, and navigate conflicts. You need theory of mind, the ability to model others' mental states. These capabilities require significant neural infrastructure. The brain regions that support social cognition, the prefrontal cortex, temporal lobes, amygdala, and others, are metabolically expensive, burning through glucose at rates far exceeding other tissues. So here's the question. Is Lucy's social intelligence driving her brain expansion, or is some other factor at play? The answer is probably both. Social complexity creates selection pressure for larger brains. But larger brains, once they exist, can be co-opted for other purposes: tool use, language, problem-solving, planning. Evolution is opportunistic. Lucy and several others move toward the shade of an acacia grove. On the way, Lucy spots something: a tortoise, moving slowly through the grass, vulnerable and full of protein-rich meat. This is a test. This is where we can see whether Lucy possesses what we might cautiously call proto-technology. Watch what she does. She picks up a rock, not randomly, but selectively. She tests its weight in her hand, her fingers wrapping around it with that precision grip that distinguishes hominins from other apes. She approaches the tortoise and brings the rock down on its shell with controlled force. The shell cracks. Not catastrophically. Tortoise shells are tough, evolved to withstand predator attacks, but enough to create an opening. Lucy uses her fingers to widen the crack, pulling away pieces of shell to access the meat inside. This is tool use. Simple, opportunistic, unsystematic, but tool use nonetheless. Now here's the crucial question. Is Lucy smarter than a chimpanzee? Modern chimpanzees use tools extensively. They fish for termites with modified sticks, crack nuts with stones, use leaves as sponges to extract water from tree holes, and even fashion spears from branches to hunt bush babies. Some populations have tool-using traditions passed down across generations, cultural practices that vary from group to group. So if chimpanzees already use tools, what's special about Lucy doing it? The answer lies not in whether she uses tools, but in the anatomical and cognitive changes that make her tool use different from a chimpanzee's. First, anatomy. Lucy's hand is different from a chimp's. Her thumb is longer relative to her fingers, her grip is stronger, and she has increased neural control over individual finger movements. These changes didn't evolve for tool use specifically. They probably evolved for other reasons, possibly related to feeding or locomotion. But once they existed, they made tool use more effective. Second, cognition. Lucy's brain organization is shifting toward increased frontal lobe development, which supports planning, sequencing actions, and understanding cause and effect relationships. She's not systematically manufacturing tools like Homo species will do 1,000,000 years from now. But she's better than a chimpanzee at recognizing when a tool would be useful and selecting appropriate objects to use as tools. Third, ecology. Lucy faces different challenges than forest-dwelling chimpanzees. She lives in more open environments, where fallback foods often require processing, tough roots that need digging, hard seeds that need cracking, bones that need smashing to access marrow. This creates selection pressure for improved tool use capabilities. But here's what's most important. The tools Lucy uses are unmodified natural objects. She picks up rocks that already have the right shape and weight. She doesn't chip them to create sharp edges, doesn't systematically manufacture implements for specific purposes. This is pre-technology. This is the cognitive and behavioral foundation upon which technology will eventually be built. But the building itself has barely begun. Or has it? Remember those 3.3 million-year-old stone tools from Lemekwi, Kenya? And those 3.4 million-year-old cut-marked bones from Dakika, Ethiopia? Those discoveries suggest that Lucy's contemporaries, if not Lucy herself, were already crossing the threshold from tool use to tool manufacture. But the technology is crude, inconsistent, and leaves minimal archaeological traces. For every individual who occasionally struck stones together to create sharp flakes, hundreds or thousands lived and died without ever manufacturing a tool. The behavior exists, but isn't universal, isn't systematic, isn't yet the defining characteristic of the species. We're watching technology being invented not by any single individual, not in any single moment of insight, but gradually, over hundreds of thousands of years, as random experimentation occasionally produces useful results that spread through populations via social learning. This is how all major innovations emerge in evolution. Not through sudden revolutionary leaps, but through incremental changes, each building on what came before, each slightly more effective than its predecessor, accumulated over timescales so vast they're almost incomprehensible. Afternoon, the communication gap. Lucy sits in the shade with Dinknesh and several others. The heat is oppressive, forcing inactivity. This is downtime, time for social bonding, time for the grooming and physical contact that maintains group cohesion. Lucy vocalizes softly, a series of grunts and coos that Dinknesh responds to with her own vocalizations. They're communicating, clearly. Information is being exchanged. But what kind of information? And how does this communication compare to human language? This is one of the most hotly debated questions in paleoanthropology. When did language evolve? Language, true human language with syntax, grammar, infinite generativity, is perhaps the most distinctive feature of our species. Every human culture has language. Children acquire language spontaneously, without explicit instruction. The capacity for language appears to be hardwired into human neurobiology, involving specific brain regions, Broca's area, Wernicke's area, and genetic components, the FOXP2 gene, among others. But language leaves almost no direct fossil evidence. Words don't fossilize. Grammar doesn't leave traces in bones. So we're forced to make inferences based on indirect evidence. Anatomical evidence. The position of the larynx, the size of the thoracic vertebrae, which must support the muscles needed for the fine breath control that speech requires. The structure of the hyoid bone, the presence of a hypoglossal canal, through which the nerve controlling tongue movement passes. Lucy's anatomy shows none of the specialized features associated with speech. Her larynx is positioned high in her throat like a chimpanzee's, limiting the range of sounds she can produce. Her thoracic vertebrae are small, suggesting limited breath control. Her hypoglossal canal, while slightly larger than a chimpanzee's, is much smaller than a modern human's. Archaeological evidence. The emergence of symbolic artifacts, beads, ochre pigments, cave paintings, suggests language-level cognition, because symbolism and language are likely interconnected cognitive capabilities. No symbolic artifacts appear in the archaeological record until around 100,000 years ago, more than 3 million years after Lucy's time. Genetic evidence. The FOXP2 gene, which plays a role in the neural circuitry underlying speech and language, shows human-specific mutations that occurred sometime in the last 200,000 to 300,000 years. Lucy's version of FOXP2 was probably chimpanzee-like, lacking the human-specific changes. All of this evidence points to the same conclusion. Lucy didn't have language. Not proto-language, not primitive language, not language in any form that we'd recognize as such. But she did have communication. Primatologists distinguish between calls, fixed vocalizations triggered by specific stimuli, alarm calls, food calls, threat calls. These are largely innate, not learned, and carry limited information. Gestures, intentional physical signals, hand movements, facial expressions, body postures. These can be learned, can vary between individuals, and carry more flexible information than calls. Language, symbolic communication with syntax and grammar, allowing infinite novel expressions to be constructed from finite elements. Lucy almost certainly used calls. We see these in all primates, and they're probably ancestral to the primate lineage as a whole. She probably also used gestures. Great apes use gestures extensively, and Lucy's hands and arms were well suited for gestural communication. But language? No. That innovation lies far in the future, in species with larger brains, more sophisticated vocal control, and the cognitive capacity for symbolic thought. So what is Lucy communicating when she grunts at Dinknesh? Probably emotional states. I'm calm. I'm friendly. I want contact. I'm not a threat. Possibly simple intentions. I'm going to move now. I want to groom you. I'm interested in that food. But not complex propositional content. Yesterday, I saw a predator near the river, and I think we should avoid that area today because the risk is too high. That kind of communication, displacement, talking about things not immediately present, hypothetical thinking, discussing possible future events, cause and effect reasoning, explaining why something should be done, requires language, and language doesn't yet exist. This communication gap is crucial for understanding Lucy's limitations. She can learn by observing, but she can't be taught through explanation. She can share emotional states, but she can't share detailed information about distant places or past events. She can coordinate simple group activities, but she can't plan complex cooperative strategies that require everyone to understand their role in advance. Language will change everything when it eventually evolves. It will allow the cumulative transmission of information across generations, creating culture in the modern sense. It will allow planning and coordination at scales impossible for non-linguistic species.
It will allow symbolic thought, abstract reasoning, the ability to imagine alternative realities. But that's not Lucy's world. She lives in the world of immediate experience, of direct perception, of learning by doing rather than by being told. It's a smaller world in some sense, bounded by what she can directly observe and remember. But it's the only world she knows. And it's the world in which her species has thrived for hundreds of thousands of years.
Evening. The mortality lottery. As the sun begins its descent, Lucy's group starts the dangerous journey back to sleeping trees. We've seen this before. The tight formation, the coordinated movement, the vigilance. But today is different. Today, the predation lottery comes up with a different number. The group is moving through tall grass when the attack comes. No warning roar, no dramatic chase, just sudden explosive violence as a Dinophilis erupts from concealment, targeting the individual at the edge of the group. It's not Lucy. It's a young adult male, perhaps 10 years old, strong enough to travel independently, but not yet experienced enough to position himself safely within the group formation. The cat's jaws close on his throat. He screams, a sound of pure terror and agony that triggers instant pandemonium in the group. Individuals scatter in multiple directions, some climbing the nearest trees, some running toward other trees, some freezing in confusion. Lucy runs, not consciously deciding to run, just running, her body responding to the alarm call before her conscious mind has processed what's happening. Within seconds, she's 15 feet up an acacia tree, clinging to a branch, her heart hammering, her breath coming in gasps. Below, the attack continues. The young male fights. He's strong. He has size and desperation on his side. But the Dinophilis has the advantage of surprise, positioning, and evolutionary design. Within minutes, the struggle ends.
The cat drags its kill into the tall grass and disappears. The group doesn't return to mourn. They don't gather around the death site, don't vocalize in grief, don't engage in any ritual acknowledgement of loss. They simply continue. After 20 minutes of heightened alertness, they resume their journey to sleeping trees, taking a different route now, avoiding the kill site. Do they understand what happened? Do they know that one of their group members is dead, that he will never return, that his absence is permanent? We don't know. We can observe behavior, but not internal experience. We can see that they don't search for him, don't return to where he died, don't seem to expect his reappearance. But whether this represents understanding of death as a permanent state or simply a pragmatic response to danger is impossible to determine. Modern great apes show what researchers cautiously call death-related behaviors. Mothers carrying dead infants for days or weeks, group members showing interest in fresh corpses, sometimes protecting bodies from scavengers. But there's no clear evidence that apes understand death as a permanent cessation of life, as an inevitable fate that awaits all living things. Humans understand death. We know it's coming. We fear it. We create elaborate cultural practices around it. Burial rituals, afterlife beliefs, monuments and memorials. This awareness of mortality is both a curse and a gift. It causes existential anxiety, but also gives life urgency and meaning. When did this awareness emerge? At what point did our ancestors cross the threshold from simply experiencing death as the absence of a group member to understanding death as a universal, inevitable fate? The archaeological evidence suggests it was recent, within the last 100,000 years. That's when we see deliberate burials, grave goods placed with bodies, evidence of mortuary rituals. Lucy lives more than 3 million years before this threshold. So when her group member dies, she probably experiences something: distress at the alarm calls, relief when the danger passes, possibly some sense of absence when she notices he's no longer present. But not grief in the human sense, not the understanding that death awaits her too, not the existential weight that comes with mortality awareness. This is both comforting and disturbing. Comforting because it suggests Lucy doesn't suffer the existential dread that haunts human consciousness. Disturbing because it reminds us how much of what we consider essential to human experience, awareness of mortality, concern for the future, the search for meaning, are recent evolutionary innovations, present for only a tiny fraction of the time our lineage has existed. Night, the question of consciousness. Lucy reaches her sleeping tree and climbs to her platform. She's exhausted, physically from a day of travel and foraging, emotionally from the attack that killed her group member. She settles onto the branches as darkness descends. And now we arrive at the deepest, most difficult question. What is it like to be Lucy? This is philosopher Thomas Nagel's famous question from his 1974 essay, What is it like to be a bat? He argued that consciousness has an inherently subjective character, that there's something it's like to be you, something it's like to be me, and presumably something it's like to be a bat using echolocation to navigate. But we can never fully know what that subjective experience is like for another creature, because consciousness is private, accessible only from the inside. So what is it like to be Lucy? Does she experience the world the way you do, with rich subjective awareness, with an inner narrative, with the sense of being a self that persists through time? Or is her experience simpler, more immediate, more bound to the present moment? The honest answer is, we don't know, and we can never know. But we can speculate based on what we understand about consciousness, neuroscience, and evolutionary biology. What Lucy probably has: sentience, the capacity to feel, to experience pain and pleasure, fear and comfort. All mammals almost certainly have this. It's evolutionarily ancient, crucial for survival, deeply embedded in brain structures that Lucy shares with other mammals. Perceptual awareness, the experience of seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling. Lucy's sensory systems deliver information about the world to her brain, and that information presumably feels like something to her. Emotional experience, fear, anger, affection, curiosity. These emotional states have characteristic neural signatures and behavioral expressions in primates. Lucy almost certainly feels emotions, probably similar to those experienced by modern apes. Agency, the sense of being able to act, to make choices, to affect the world. When Lucy reaches for food, she presumably experiences that reaching as something she's doing, not just something happening to her. What Lucy probably lacks: self-awareness, the ability to reflect on oneself as an object, to think, I am thinking, to recognize oneself as a distinct entity with a past and future. Modern great apes show limited self-awareness. They can recognize themselves in mirrors, but full recursive self-awareness is probably uniquely human. Mental time travel, the ability to mentally project oneself into the past, episodic memory, or future, perspective planning. Lucy can remember locations and individuals, but she probably can't deliberately recall specific past events or imagine specific future scenarios. Theory of mind. The ability to attribute mental states to others, to understand that others have beliefs and desires that may differ from one's own. Modern apes show limited theory of mind in some experimental contexts, but the sophisticated version seen in humans probably evolved more recently.
Symbolic thought. The ability to understand that one thing can stand for another, that marks on a surface can represent objects or ideas, that sounds can symbolize concepts. This capacity, fundamental to language and art and mathematics, probably doesn't exist in Lucy. So Lucy's consciousness is probably something like this: a continuous stream of perceptual and emotional experience, bound to the present moment, without the reflective, self-aware, temporally extended character of human consciousness. She experiences hunger and fear and comfort, but she doesn't think about experiencing them. She acts and perceives, but she doesn't watch herself acting and perceiving. Her consciousness is primary, not secondary, direct, not reflective, lived, not examined. In some ways, this might be liberating. Without self-awareness comes freedom from self-criticism, from existential angst, from the burden of knowing you'll die. Lucy lives fully in the present, responding to immediate circumstances, untroubled by regrets about the past or anxieties about the future. But it also means she's trapped in the present. She can't learn from history she doesn't remember, or plan for futures she can't imagine. Her world is smaller, more constrained, more limited than the vast temporal landscape that human consciousness inhabits. This is the trade-off. This is what we gained and lost in the evolution of human consciousness. We gained the ability to transcend the present moment, to learn from the past and plan for the future, to imagine alternative realities and choose between them. But we lost the immediacy, the presence, the unself-conscious engagement with the world that characterizes animal consciousness. Lucy lives in the world we've lost, and we can never fully return to it, because once consciousness becomes aware of itself, it cannot become unaware. Once you know you're thinking, you cannot unknow it. Once you've tasted self-awareness, you cannot go back to pure experience.
This is both our glory and our curse as a species. We are the apes who learned to think about thinking, who became aware of awareness, who can stand outside ourselves and observe ourselves observing. It makes us powerful, creative, capable of extraordinary achievements. But it also makes us anxious, divided, unable to rest fully in the present moment. Lucy rests in that present moment now, as darkness completes its conquest of the sky. She sleeps, without dreaming of the future, without regretting the past, without knowing that 3.2 million years from now, her bones will be discovered, her life reconstructed, her existence pondered by creatures so different from her that they might as well be from another planet. She simply sleeps, and in that sleep, she is complete. Dawn again. The meaning of transformation. The sun rises on Lucy's third day, or perhaps her 1,000th day, or perhaps her last day. We can't know. We'll never know when or how this particular individual died, whether she lived to old age or died young, whether predators took her, or disease, or simple accident. But it doesn't matter. Lucy's individual story is complete. We've followed her through a representative day, watched her eat and sleep and fear and survive, glimpsed the evolutionary forces that shaped her and will shape her descendants. Now we need to step back one final time and ask, What does all this mean? Lucy lives between two worlds, between ape and human, between tree and ground, between instinct and intelligence. She is a transition, a bridge, an intermediate form connecting what came before to what will come after. But here's the thing about transitions. They're not incomplete or inferior versions of what they're transitioning toward. They're complete in themselves, adapted to their own circumstances, successful by their own metrics. Lucy isn't a failed human. She's a successful Australopithecine, a species that thrived for 1 million years, that spread across East Africa, that survived climate changes and predation pressure and competition from other species. By evolutionary standards, that's a success story. The fact that her species eventually went extinct, that other lineages replaced them, that the evolutionary experiment moved in different directions, none of that diminishes the reality that Lucy and her kind were well adapted to their time and place. This is crucial to understand. Evolution doesn't have a goal. It's not aiming at anything. It's not trying to produce humans or intelligence or consciousness. It's simply the process of differential reproductive success. Individuals with traits that help them survive and reproduce leave more descendants, and those traits become more common over time. Lucy's bipedalism, her small brain, her diet, her social structure, all of these features are evolutionary solutions to specific challenges in specific environments. They're not stepping stones toward humanity. They're adaptations in their own right. And yet, they did lead to us. Not inevitably, not purposefully, but through a contingent series of events, environmental changes, and random mutations that happened to accumulate in directions that eventually produced the hominin lineage and ultimately Homo sapiens. This is the paradox at the heart of evolution. It's both non-directional and apparently directional. It has no goal, but it produces outcomes that look designed. It's random, but it's not chaotic. It's purposeless, but it creates purpose. Lucy embodies this paradox. She's not trying to evolve toward humanity. She's just trying to survive and reproduce. But in that survival and reproduction, in the selection pressures that favor slightly larger brains and slightly better tool use and slightly more sophisticated social intelligence, she and her species are participating in the process that will eventually produce us. The threshold question. When did we become human? So when does the ape become human? At what point in the journey from Lucy to us do we cross the threshold into humanity? This question has no simple answer because humanity isn't a binary state. You're either human or you're not. It's a collection of traits, each of which evolved at different times. Bipedalism, present in Lucy even earlier in species like Ardipithecus. If this is what makes us human, then we've been human for at least 4 to 6 million years. Tool manufacture appears around 3.3 million years ago in crude form, becomes systematic around 2.6 million years ago with Homo species. If this defines humanity, we've been human for 2 to 3 million years. Large brains. Brain size increases gradually from Lucy's 400 cc to modern human 1,350 cc, crossing the 1,000 cc threshold around 1.5 million years ago with Homo erectus. But brain organization matters more than size, and modern human brain organization probably emerged within the last 200,000 to 300,000 years. Language probably evolved within the last 200,000 to 300,000 years based on genetic evidence, FOXP2 mutations, and anatomical evidence, descended larynx, enhanced breath control. If language defines humanity, we're very recent. Symbolic thought appears in the archaeological record around 100,000 years ago with beads, ochre, and art. If this is the threshold, humans are barely 100,000 years old. Behavioral modernity. The full suite of modern human behaviors, complex tools, long-distance trade, elaborate burials, cave art, musical instruments, appears around 50,000 to 40,000 years ago. If this is what makes us human, we're only 50,000 years old as a species. The truth is that becoming human was a process, not an event. There was no single moment when an ape gave birth to a human, no clear threshold that was crossed. Instead, human traits accumulated gradually over millions of years, with different traits appearing at different times in different lineages. Lucy represents an early stage in this process. She has some human traits: bipedalism, enhanced manual dexterity, relatively large brain for her body size, but lacks others: language, systematic tool manufacture, symbolic thought. She's partway along the journey, far enough from the chimpanzee-like ancestor to be recognizably different, but not yet far enough to be recognizably human. If you could somehow bring Lucy forward in time, place her in a modern city, teach her to use tools and language, could she learn? Could she adapt? Could she become functionally human through education and acculturation? Almost certainly not. The cognitive gap is too large, the neural architecture too different, the capacity for symbolic thought and language too absent. You could probably teach her simple tool use through demonstration, could establish basic communication through gestures, could form a relationship of sorts. But you couldn't teach her to read, to speak, to understand abstract concepts, to navigate the symbolic landscape that humans inhabit. She's not human. She's not going to become human. She's something else, something earlier, something simpler, something that shares some of our traits, but lacks the full suite of characteristics that define our species. And that's okay. That's not a failing. That's just what she is, an Australopithecine, a species in her own right, adapted to her own time and place, living a life complete in its own terms. The legacy, what Lucy gave us. So what did we inherit from Lucy? Not genes, probably not, given that her species likely went extinct without directly ancestral descendants reaching us, though we can't be completely certain about Australopithecine phylogeny.
But we did inherit the innovations her species pioneered. Bipedalism. The anatomical changes that allowed Lucy to walk upright were passed forward through descendant species, refined and improved over millions of years, eventually producing the highly efficient striding gait that modern humans possess. Dietary flexibility. The ability to exploit diverse food sources, to shift between fruits and roots and possibly meat, created the ecological generalist strategy that allowed hominins to spread across Africa and eventually the entire planet. Social intelligence. The cognitive capacity to navigate complex social relationships, to form alliances, to track third-party interactions. This is the foundation upon which human social cognition was built, expanded over millions of years into the sophisticated social intelligence that characterizes our species. Tool use. The capacity to recognize that objects can be used to solve problems, that stones can break bones and sticks can dig roots. This cognitive flexibility,
present in rudimentary form in Lucy's species, was amplified in descendant lineages until it became the systematic tool manufacture that defines the Homo lineage. These aren't small things. These are the fundamental innovations that made human evolution possible. Without bipedalism, hominins couldn't have freed their hands for tool use. Without dietary flexibility, they couldn't have survived the climate fluctuations that characterized the Pleistocene. Without social intelligence, they couldn't have formed the large cooperative groups that eventually allowed cultural accumulation. Without proto-tool use, they couldn't have developed the systematic technology that became a hallmark of the human lineage. Lucy and her species pioneered all of these innovations. Not perfectly, not in their final form, but in versions that were good enough to survive, good enough to be passed forward, good enough to serve as the foundation for what came next.
This is how evolution works. This is how major transitions occur, not through sudden revolutionary leaps, but through incremental changes, each building on what came before, each slightly more effective than its predecessor, accumulated over vast stretches of time. Lucy is one increment in that process, one step in the journey from ape to human. Not the first step. Species before her had already begun experimenting with bipedalism and dietary shifts. Not the last step. Species after her would continue innovating, enlarging brains, developing language, creating culture. But an important step nonetheless. A necessary step. A step without which the later steps might not have been possible. Epilogue. The Fossil. On November 24, 1974, paleoanthropologist Donald Johanson and graduate student Tom Gray were surveying the Hadar region of Ethiopia's Afar Triangle, looking for fossils. They were about to return to camp when Johanson decided to check one more gully. There, eroding out of the sediment, he spotted a small fragment of arm bone, then another bone, then another. 40% of a single Australopithecine skeleton, the most complete early hominin ever discovered at that time. They named her AL-288-1, the 288th catalogued specimen from the Afar locality. But that night, celebrating the discovery while listening to the Beatles' Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds on repeat, someone suggested calling the skeleton Lucy. The name stuck. Lucy became famous, iconic, the face of human evolution for the general public. Museums around the world display casts of her skeleton. Textbooks describe her species. Documentaries reconstruct her life. But here's what's extraordinary. The individual we've been following through this narrative, the living, breathing, thinking creature we've watched eat and sleep and fear and survive, that individual has been dead for 3.2 million years. Her body decomposed, her soft tissues feeding scavengers and bacteria, her bones buried under layers of sediment, fossilized by mineral replacement over incomprehensible stretches of time. The Lucy you can see in museums is not her. It's a mineralized replica, a stone copy of the calcium framework that once supported her flesh. The actual Lucy, her blood and muscle and skin, her brain and thoughts and feelings, her individual life with all its unique experiences, that's gone. Forever. Irrecoverable. All we have is stone and inference. The shape of bones suggesting how muscles attached. Wear patterns on teeth suggesting diet. The spacing of footprints suggesting walking speed. Fossilized environments suggesting climate and habitat. From these fragments, we reconstruct a life. We tell a story.
We imagine what it might have been like to be Lucy, to live in her world, to face her challenges. But it's always imagination, always interpretation, always a story we're telling ourselves about the past rather than the past itself. And yet, the story matters. It matters because Lucy is part of our history, part of the long chain of ancestors and evolutionary cousins that connects us to the origin of life on Earth. Understanding her helps us understand ourselves, where we came from, how we got here, what makes us human. It matters because Lucy reminds us that humanity isn't separate from nature, isn't a special creation, isn't exempt from the evolutionary forces that shape all life. We're part of the natural world, products of the same processes that produced Lucy and dinosaurs and bacteria. It matters because Lucy's life, short, difficult, lived entirely in the present moment, driven by immediate needs rather than abstract goals, is the baseline against which we can measure how far we've come. We have language and culture and technology and art. But Lucy's ancestors survived for millions of years without any of those things, using simpler tools, simpler cognition, simpler social structures. And finally, it matters because Lucy's story is unfinished. Her species went extinct, but the evolutionary experiment continued. Other lineages arose, tested new adaptations, explored new possibilities. Some succeeded, some failed. But the process continued, is still continuing, will continue as long as life persists on Earth. We are part of that process. We are Lucy's legacy. Not her direct descendants, but the inheritors of the innovations her species pioneered. We walk upright because she walked upright. We use tools because her lineage began using tools. We live in complex social groups because she lived in social groups. But we're also something new, something that didn't exist in Lucy's time and couldn't have been predicted from her anatomy or behavior. We have capacities, language, symbolic thought, cumulative culture that represent genuine evolutionary novelties, innovations that emerged over millions of years of continued experimentation. Where will this process lead? What comes after humanity? What innovations will emerge in the next million years, the next 10 million years, assuming we survive that long? We don't know. We can't know. Evolution doesn't plan ahead, doesn't have goals, doesn't optimize for any particular outcome. But if Lucy could teach us anything, it's this: transformation is possible. Radical change can emerge from incremental steps. The ape can become something more than an ape. Given enough time, enough selection pressure, enough random variation to work with. Lucy stood between two worlds, between ape and human, between tree and ground, between the past and the future. She didn't know she was standing there, didn't understand her position in evolutionary history, didn't think about what her species might become. She just lived. She survived. She persisted. And in that persistence, in those millions of individual lives across hundreds of thousands of years, a transformation occurred. The ape didn't become human overnight, but it became something different, something with new capacities, new possibilities, new ways of being in the world. We are the latest expression of that transformation. But we're not the final one. The process continues. Evolution doesn't stop. Somewhere, perhaps millions of years in the future, another species might look back at us the way we look back at Lucy, with curiosity, with wonder, with the recognition that we were something different from what came before, something that pioneered new ways of being, but also something incomplete, something that hadn't yet developed the full range of capacities that will eventually define their time. They might reconstruct our lives, imagine our experiences, tell stories about what it was like to be us, the way we've told stories about Lucy. And they might recognize, as we recognize with Lucy, that we were not failures, not incomplete versions of some ideal form, but creatures complete in ourselves, adapted to our own time and place, living lives meaningful in their own terms. This is Lucy's gift to us, the reminder that life is always in transition, always changing, always experimenting with new forms. The past flows into the present flows into the future, and in that flow, impossible things become real. 3.2 million years ago, a small female Australopithecine woke up in a tree, descended to the ground, and began another day of surviving in a dangerous world. She had no idea that her life would matter, that her species would be remembered, that creatures almost unimaginably different from her would study her bones and ponder her existence. She just lived, and that's enough. That has to be enough. Because in the end, that's all any of us can do. Live as fully as possible in the time we're given. Navigate the challenges we face. Persist in the face of dangers we don't fully understand. Lucy did that. She lived. She persisted. She became part of the story that led to us. And her story, her life, her struggles, her small place in the vast sweep of evolutionary time, reminds us that we too are part of an ongoing story, one that began billions of years ago and will continue long after we're gone. We are all standing between two worlds, between what we were and what we might become, between the past and the future, between the known and the unknowable. Just like Lucy, just like every living thing that has ever existed. The sun rises, the day begins, life continues. And that's the only story that matters, the only story there's ever been. Thank you for joining Lucy on her journey through deep time. Her world is gone, but her legacy persists. In the bones she left behind, in the evolutionary innovations her species pioneered, and in the questions her existence raises about what it means to be human. We are all Lucy's children, heirs to a transformation that began millions of years before we existed, and will continue millions of years after we're gone. The journey from ape to human was long, difficult, and ultimately successful. But it's not over. Evolution continues. The story has no ending, only new chapters waiting to be written.